Broadcast Radio Network.
The car comes to a stop just a few feet short of the start-finish line. Emo raises his hands as if to say, I can't believe what has happened. We are 16 laps away from the finish of the 500, and Emerson Fittipaldi is sitting here with the car stalled in the middle of the racetrack without a rear wing.
Dario Franchitti watches Sato spin and hit the wall behind him on the final lap of the race. He and his teammate will cross the yard of bricks. Side by side, the fist pumping.
They are side by side. Elio looks to the outside. Elio will have to take the number 2 spot. He's running.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, here we call the checkered flag for the winner of the world's greatest auto race, the voice of the 500, Paul Hay.
Number 4, the Pennzoil Chaparral, his hands in the air. Johnny Rutherford wins the 1980 Indianapolis 500-mile race.
197 laps complete, working on 198. We look for them now at the head of the main straightaway, and we have them coming now. There's Al, there's Emo, here's Jerry Baker.
There are 3 cars to work their way around. Now, Unser's got by one of them. He got by Rocky Moran, so Moran is now stuck in the between. Now, there is Fittipaldi moving around Moran in number 2.
They got slower traffic in front of them now. Al trying to get to the outside to pass Emo right behind him. Emo moves to the outside, down in front of Howdy Bell. Moves still very close to that white line. They head for 3. Emo may have him, Larry.
They're side by side. Emo on the inside. Al caught in traffic. Goes high. They touch wheels. Al Jr. into the wall hard. Emerson Fittipaldi keeps on going. They touched wheels. Al Jr. into the wall, and Emerson Fittipaldi will lead them back to the yellow flag.
So, that's racing, I guess. We have a winner now, most probably, moving by now. Emerson Fittipaldi, who touched wheels with Al Unser Jr., has assumed the lead, and he's passed you, Jerry Baker.
We're on the last lap.
Oh, this is what you pay your money for right here. Here's Buddy Lazier. It's about, maybe 30 yards, and there's Davy Jones. They settle him into the short chute, and Teddy Double's got a good look at it.
Buddy Lazier is in control, smoothly through turn number 2. Jones quickly behind, but Lazier in control, heading to 3.
A half lap to go, indeed. It's Buddy Lazier's race to win or lose. And now, about 30, 35, 40 yards. Nothing between first and second as they head to turn 4.
Buddy Lazier, the final turn of the day. He has it made. He's just got to keep it between the white line. Here to call the finish, Bob Jenkins.
The 1996 Indianapolis 500 is won by Buddy Lazier.
Has but 1 lap to go, and the rookie will pick up the checkered flag. The white flag is out now. 1 more lap to go. White flag for Juan Montoya. He is all by himself right now as he heads into turn number 1.
7 victories in cars last year, 7 poles. He's about to win the biggest prize in his history. He is in the second turn.
Talk about what seems to be the perfect mesh between man and machine. This guy has been brilliant. That car has been near perfect all day.
Climbed into an IndyCar for the first time in March. It was a marriage that he became accustomed to very rapidly. Came within a couple of ticks to getting the pole. He's going to get the big prize, though, Bob Levy, the Indy 500. Yeah, his target is right on target. Coming through for Juan Montoya. Heads for the checkered flag. Call the finish, Mike King. He may be a rookie, but he is for real. Flashbulbs capture the finish as Juan Montoya wins the 84th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race.
Now less than 2 miles away from winning the 90th Indianapolis 500.
More left-hand turns, and Marco Andretti has stretched the lead.
From ISM Raceway in Avondale, Arizona, this is the Verizon IndyCar Series on the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network.
Smack dab in the middle of the Arizona desert in 1964. Didn't know it at the time, but a legend was being born. We're talking about this fabulous raceway, ISM Raceway, in the suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, to be more accurate. Hello, everyone. I'm Mark James. We want to welcome you as we get ready for racing after what has seemed like an eternity off. We are ready to get back after it. It's the Phoenix Grand Prix here at ISM Raceway. Happy to be joined in the broadcast booth by our driver analyst, Anders Crone. And folks, you join us just as the green flag flies. And Anders, with the exception of a couple of test sessions, most notably on the road course at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it seemed like an eternity since we were seeing it.
Yeah, it has been. I'm still buzzing from St. Pete because it was just such an incredible weekend and a race where I think we now realize that we have no idea who's going to be competitive at any of these tracks here. So even though these guys tested here at ISM Raceway a few weeks ago, we still have no idea because the conditions are so different. And again, to your point about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course test, it was so cold there that basically everything that was learned is going to have to be unlearned come race time. So I think, completely open slate here at ISM Raceway.
Colleges and fraternities frowned on initiations these days and hazing and whatnot. It was a harsh introduction, if you will, for Robert Wickens to the Verizon IndyCar Series, the dominant car on the day, and things didn't end up quite as he had hoped, I'm sure.
Yeah, but man, oh man, that would have given him so much momentum and just so much, feeling that he can be such a competitive guy here. I think his mindset for this weekend is not going to be the same that he had in St. Pete. I think he went into St. Pete, he felt like he had a really good car, and again, as we've talked about before, historically SPM always have a good street course car. Here, this is going to be a bit more of a challenging weekend. He did a good job at the test here, but it's just going to be about survival for him here, just building momentum and not taking any big risks. And so I don't think he's expecting to be a contender for the race win here this weekend, but you bet you, he has his eyes on the wins in Long Beach.
69 laps led on the day, and that incident with Alexander Rossi into turn one on a restart late in the race opened the door for Sebastian Bourdais to go back to that.
Yeah, exactly. And Bourdais, I mean, I couldn't believe it. He held on for so long. I think he did 36 laps on a set of black tires. It was just hanging on for dear life and managed somehow to fend off Wickens for so many laps with so much pressure. And I spoke to him afterwards and I asked him how did he do it, and he said up until the full course yellow, the tires were actually working really, really well. But the moment it went back to green again, he said the car, it was like driving on ice. And from there, he went into, obviously, survival mode, and somehow it worked out for him. So, Bourdais, a little bit of luck there, but the way he moved his way forward off strategy was just incredible.
Under the previous incarnation with the DW12 and the Aero kits, little, if anything, transfers from a place like St. Petersburg to here. I would say that slate is even more blank with the new Aero kit we have.
110%, and I think it's such a cool thing that we get to come here, and again, even though all the teams have tested here, the conditions, it's so much warmer here right now than it's been during testing, and so that's just going to add to the complexity. And I think what we're going to see today is, in this session, everyone's going to be focusing on qualifying runs, because qualifying is next up, and then during night practice, that's when they're going to focus on traffic running. So I think what we're going to see now is a lot of cars on track going for 2-3 lap runs here, figuring out the car, taking a long time in the pits, changing shocks, changing springs, changing aero settings, everything to find just that perfect qualifying setup. And then this evening is when we're going to figure out who's going to be strong in a pack setting.
Yeah, we'll get you to expand a little bit in just a couple of minutes on whether or not you think that's the approach that you would like to take if you were calling the shots. But you mentioned the conditions. Let's find out more about that specifically. One of our pit reporters for this session is Dave First. Hello, Dave.
And good afternoon. Great to be back on the oval at ISM Raceway. And, for those of us that flew here yesterday from the Midwest, you'd be hard-pressed to complain about any of the conditions out here at Avondale, Arizona. Air temperature around 90 degrees. Track temperature is way up there at 129 degrees. Humidity level, as you might expect here in the desert area, just 15%. The wind, though, is picking up, and I think it's expected to pick up throughout the course of the afternoon and the evening as well. Wind about 5, maybe gusting up to 10, maybe 15 miles an hour. So that's something that these ultra-fast Verizon IndyCar Series machines will be going through. But anyway, gorgeous conditions here as we begin this 1-hour practice session at ISM Raceway.
Let's welcome in the gentleman who normally anchors the Indy Lights presented by Cooper Tires, and also we'll find him out on the course and road and street courses. Going to jump back to a little bit of the old days for him, although he's not really that old. His days covering the pits. We welcome in Nick Yeoman. Hello, Nick.
Good afternoon, Mark Janes. I can certainly attest to those conditions that Dave talked about. Plenty warm down here, but with the lack of humidity, makes it feel pretty good. That's one challenge for these teams down here, the heat of Phoenix here in the spring. That's always something you got to deal with. One of the things I'm watching this weekend is the track conditions, and one of the things that has been going on over the last couple days, here at ISM Raceway is some rubber laid down on the racetrack to try to extend the racing groove. There's been a tractor with 4 Firestone tires hooked to the back of it with a contraption that can lay down, push, and compress those tires on the racetrack. And over the last couple days, they're making a lot of laps around this racetrack, Mark. Of course, passing has been awful tough in recent years here in Phoenix. I think it's going to be, we got some more variables to work with this weekend with the track condition, and then obviously something we've been talking about at St. Pete that carries over here to Phoenix. Of course, this new aero kit with more downforce from the bottom of the cars, not as much on the top. These drivers aren't going to have these cars pinned to the racetrack. And I heard Graham Rahal talk a little bit about during a press conference before this practice session that he feels like there's going to be a few guys in this practice session, and then later tonight, him, Takuma Sato, his teammate, Ryan Hunter-Reay, there's going to be some guys that try to venture up to that second groove, lay a little bit more rubber down, and hopefully, Mark, it improves some passing here at ISM Raceway in Phoenix.
We were talking before we went on, Andrews, and once upon a time, Sam Hornish was the master at bringing in a high groove, but that was on the 1.5-mile tracks like Chicago, Kentucky, Texas, Kansas. This is a vastly different animal.
It is indeed, but I kind of go back to thinking to Texas last year when everyone said, it's going to be a single file race, there's not going to be any passing. And then you hit the green button for the race, and it was just absolute chaos. I don't know that we can expect the exact same chaos this weekend, but certainly if you have a car that's able to go just even a half a lane higher than the normal racing groove, that can be enough to give you that clean air, little bit of clean air, give you 25% more clean air on your wings and enable you to follow a little bit closer. So I think, there could potentially be a big disconnect here between who qualifies up front and who's racing well, because qualifying obviously just about outright pace, but racing is all about how you fit that mechanical setup with the aero setting and how you're able to manage around traffic, and I think that's going to really be the key tonight to see who's really focused on that, who isn't that worried about outright pace. And I think we could have one of those weekends where we have a bit of a surprise in store, almost like Sebastian Bourdais back in 2014 at the Milwaukee Mile, when he wasn't that worried about the qualifying setup of the car whatsoever, but he just had a rocket of a race car.
Well, we like to, from time to time, get the perspective of some of our friends who are motorsports journalists who cover the series on a regular basis. One of those we had, he reminded me on for the first time 1 year ago when he was tabbed by the Indianapolis Star to replace their longtime motorsports beat writer, Kurt Cabot. Jim Aiello joins us. Well, happy anniversary, Jim. Welcome back a year later.
Thank you very much. As I was telling you guys before we started here, I feel like it's just almost as big an accomplishment as the 25-year anniversary of Mario's win here. So
thank you.
Right up there.
We appreciate that. So let's talk first of all about this assignment for you. I know that you have Kurt in a position of vice president of communications. So he's around, and you pick his brain, get some ideas off of him, and things of that nature. But all in all, your assessment, was it what you thought it would be, more than you thought it would be, challenging? What?
It was all those things, really. I mean, it was a lot of fun. The access here, the people here are fantastic to work with. Everybody was willing to help. Everybody kind of knew I was new to the paddock, but I found fresh, friendly faces pretty much everywhere I went. So that was a really, really nice thing, and I felt like I got more comfortable, more in my groove as the season went on last year.
Well, with the way your industry is changing over the years, I mean, I guess it would have been easy for somebody who takes care of the dollars and cents to, when Kurt hung it up, to say, you know what, we don't really need to have someone covering the series full time, but I think the series benefits from the fact that commitment continues, and I know you do a great job of interacting with the race fans, and I think the response to what you do is overwhelmingly positive. You have some very big shoes to fill, for sure.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I know that, but no, I was told when Kurt decided to leave that the Indy Star will cover IndyCar racing, always have, always will. So that was a good thing to hear, and I'm glad that they stuck by that.
I don't know that I remember an off-season as active as this one was. I mean, to think that essentially the roster was set, all but set, including most of the field for the Indianapolis 500 before we got to mid to late February. And we of course had the test here, and I think the roster was pretty well set then, again, except for a few slots in the Indianapolis 500. And boy, I don't know that anyone could have scripted a better weekend than what we had to start the season at St. Petersburg.
Absolutely, and I think just to go back to what you were saying, was we had 24 cars here at Phoenix, all the decked out liveries, everybody was ready to go. There was all the driver assignments were pretty much set. I think it was a really, really good sign, good positive indicator for the series that it's heading in the right direction. And then obviously to capitalize on that preseason momentum at St. Pete with that thrilling race that we had there. I think that was just everything IndyCar could have asked for to start the season.
Do we get the sense that in 2019 maybe we might not get a month off between events?
I think there is hope for that. Yes, yeah. I definitely think that that's the idea. I don't think anybody likes taking a month off in between right now because you build all the momentum going into the first race, and then it kind of goes away. I mean, people are still paying attention, still putting stories out, people are still reading, but it'd be a lot easier if it was just a little bit closer to St. Pete.
Well, let's face it, though, and you and I have talked to everyone from Mark Miles to Jay Fry to C.J. O'Donnell and others. It's just not as simple as saying we want to race there and we're going to put it on this day. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces and parts when it comes to putting together a schedule.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got to be up to the tracks. They got to be able to have an open time for you, and a lot of times we've heard Mark Miles talk about date equity. He really likes to have the races at the same time every year, so people can kind of get used to the schedule, used to the flow of the schedule. So they're going to have a chance to maybe manipulate the schedule coming up here, and at least take a look at some things at the end of this season. But I'm not going to promise big changes, but they're definitely going to take a look and see what might work if they can move some things around.
Jim Aiello was with us for this session from the Indianapolis Star. So Anders, again, you mentioned that approach in making this session kind of, because it's really very abbreviated, in my opinion. Normally you get a couple of practice sessions, then a practice session, then qualifying. This is it. Before we go qualifying a little bit later on today, the tough nut to crack is the fact that this session right here, you might as well chase qualifying here, Anders, because this is nothing like what we're going to race under tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. And as you've seen, there's so many guys just sitting in pit lane right now, so everyone's kind of playing the chicken. Everyone wants the other teams to lay down rubber for them to get a good qualifying sim, but eventually someone has to go on track, and James Hinchcliffe at the moment is the first taker to do that. So he's out there probably right now on a semi-quali sim, which basically means they wouldn't have trimmed the car out as much as they will during qualifying, but at this point they're really going to try to get the mechanical feeling for the car, make sure the overall balance is good. And James is one of those guys that had a fairly challenging test here a few weeks ago, so it's going to be important for him to build some momentum back in the car and some trust in the car here. And so he's doing probably a short run here and going to come in and pit and do some changes.
To pit road, Nick Yeoman.
Yeah, Rob Edwards is the team strategist for Alexander Rossi on the 27 car. Bit of a disjointed start to the practice session. Not seeing a lot of guys go out. What do you attribute that to?
Well, obviously conditions are very different to what we're going to race in. We obviously were here testing a couple of months ago, so I think everyone's just sort of waiting till they think that the time left is right to start running.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this session compared to, say, the second session later tonight?
Probably of all of the running that we're going to do over the course of the next 2 days, this is the least relevant session. But obviously it's important to run at some point just to check the car out for qualifying. But I think most people probably got a pretty good idea of where they want to be qualifying based on when we were here in February.
Hey, how pleased were you guys with the start to the season? I know you would have loved to pick up a win and with the controversial finish, plenty to talk about, but you guys were strong all weekend. How big is that to start the year for you guys?
I think we came into the year expecting to be strong, right? The team's got a lot of confidence. Alex is obviously right there. Drew's working well. And I think Alex did a great job. Basically drove from 12th up to 2nd and over the first 10 or 12 laps. And a great race between ourselves and Robert. And as you say, a little bit of controversy at the end, but I think we should focus on the positives, right? All the overtaking during the race and the fact that you had two guys that were running hard, separated by a second or less for a good part of the race. I think that bodes really well for the rest of the year.
Appreciate it. That's Rob Edwards on the pit box. It was a great start to the season for that 27 team, and that trio, Mark, is one that I know a lot of people are awfully high on. Strategist Rob Edwards, the engineer Jeremy Millis, and then of course the winner of the 100th Indianapolis 500, Alexander Rossi. A lot of people looking at that team, especially after the strong start at St. Pete, as a certain championship contender here in 2018.
Anders, a moment for the mayor of Hinchtown.
Oh boy, that's exactly what you don't want so early in the session, but that's something that can really take you off your path when it comes to figuring out the setup. James just entered turn 1 and was cranking in the wheel in, but then suddenly the rear just snapped underneath him, and on an oval there is no worse feeling than that when the rear just snaps around on you. And luckily he was able to catch it there, but from a car setup perspective, that's a difficult thing to rebound from, because you need to find some compliance, you need to find the ability to keep putting steering wheel input in the middle of the corner, and when you constantly feel like the rear's going to break away from you, it's difficult to be productive. So they're going to be making some major changes to that car. I saw them actually taking the front wing off, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do a big front bar change or throwing something really big at the car to settle it down.
Jim Aiello from the Indianapolis Stars with us for this session. And Jim, let's face it, during the offseason, with the horsepower and the downforce, those combinations were announced, downforce off the car, putting it into the driver's hand. All the drivers applauded and they said, yeah, that's what we want. Walking through the paddock after St. Pete, did you get the feeling that most of them still felt that way?
They were putting it nicely. No, I mean, this is what they wanted from the beginning. They wanted to have more control, but I think and put this more in their hands. But it's not going to be easy right away. They're not going to figure this out in the first race. St. Pete was really tough. I know for a lot of the veteran drivers, they're really just having to unlearn a lot of the things that they have been building up for the last 6, 7, 8 years for a lot of them. And coming back here, yeah, they tested it in February, but this is going to be a different beast. So now we're back on an oval with these new cars, and it's going to be tough. And I think you're going to hear some drivers, I'm not going to say complain, but maybe not say like the greatest things about the new car. But again, I think this is at the end of the day, this is what they want. It's going to be more competitive. So.
That's right. That would be inaccurate, Jim, because drivers never complain about anything. At least it's been our experience anyway. So we're glad he put that qualifier on. So Anders, how impressive of a run was it? Now let's face it, Wickens and Alexander Rossi gave Sebastian Bourdais the opportunity to win the race with the incident that they had in turn number 1. But a pretty impressive drive for a guy in this new setup.
Yeah, I mean, he still put himself in that position, and that was the key to it all. Is he had some ups and downs during the course of the weekend, didn't qualify up front, and really had to go off strategy to make it happen. And it was all, again, thanks to that middle stint where he spent, I think, 36 or 37 laps on one set of tires. I don't think any of the drivers could have managed that on that particular day. And I spoke to him again afterwards and asked him about it, and he talked about just how challenging it was. But then he also actually made reference to Alexander Rossi and how impressive he was with how Rossi was able to drive that car. I remember us talking numerous times during the course of that race of just how free, just how loose that car of Alexander Rossi is, and it can be incredibly quick over one lap, but it's so difficult to manage over a full race distance. And Bourdais told me, he was like, yeah, I couldn't do that. That is just crazy how he was able to hang on to that car. So yeah, but Sebastian Bourdais absolutely put himself in that position. It was a well-deserved win. Obviously, Wickens was dominating the majority of the day, but at the end of the day, the race isn't over till the checkered flag falls, and yeah, he wasn't P1 at that moment.
While certainly Alexander Rossi understands at this point, Jim Aiello, the life-changing experience, which is winning the Indianapolis 500. I think while he's proud of that, no longer necessarily wants to be focused solely upon that. I think we go back to his dominant performance at Watkins Glen, coming out of the box strong like he did at St. Pete. He's ready to be a championship contender.
I almost think he was more proud of that run at Watkins Glen because he was dominant during practice, he dominated qualifying, and he dominated the race. It just showed that he had all the skill in the world that he needed. He talked about it after the Indianapolis 500 during qualifying, that how proud he was to qualify as high as he did last year, just because so many people thought what he did the previous year was a fluke. So he is as determined to prove that a fuel saving strategy that won him the 500 wasn't a fluke. It was something he drove that car to where it needed to be, and he definitely thinks he's a championship contender this year. And he's not the kind of guy that kind of buckles under pressure. So I really do think that he's going to contend. We saw how great he was at St. Pete, and I don't expect it to go away the rest of the season.
Having been a driver, Anders, do you chuckle when people talk about it, what a fluke that it was that he won the 500? Because there's a number that he had to set in terms of being able to make that fuel mileage that Brian Herta figured out, and the rest of that crew work. And for a guy that didn't have a broad amount of experience in a Verizon IndyCar Series car, that made it even more impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it's anything but a fluke. I mean, he absolutely worked his tail off to make that happen. I mean, Brian Herta presented him with the opportunity, but then it was up to him to fully capitalize on it. And the way he managed that, the way he was able to stretch fuel mileage while keeping his position, I mean, he absolutely deserved that race win. So, yeah, whoever says that's a fluke, they are completely in the wrong. But I think what I've really come to appreciate about Alexander Rossi following his win is that he's actually become more hungry. And I really like that. It would have been so easy for him to say, I won the 500 on my first attempt. I'm complacent. I don't have to try that hard. But I feel like every single race weekend that went by, he's gotten better and better and more complete of a driver. And he's fully embraced the Verizon IndyCar Series way of living and breathing, and I love that. And so I completely agree with what you were saying. I think we're going to see a potential championship run for him this year. He just looks very content and in a really good place with his team, in his car. Looks like Andretti Autosport have their street course game sorted out, so that's another big benefit. So, yeah, I think we're going to expect a lot of him this year.
Well, his teammate earlier this year on the amazing race, unfortunately, that's the only race he has under his belt in Nick Gilman. He's got a big one in the offing coming up. We're talking about Connor Daly.
Yeah, of course, here in Phoenix, Connor Daly, an interested spectator, but in the month of May, he will be behind the wheel of a car in the Indianapolis 500. At least that is the game plan. Good to see you here in Phoenix, Connor. Let's talk a little bit about that deal that was announced here over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, very excited about it. The car looks great. The United States Air Force representing them. I mean, it's a huge honor. It's an incredible deal for me. I mean, I love America a lot, so it's a really cool, position for me to be in. And we're just trying to, continue to put partners together to bring the program, to maximum strength. And I think, we're working every day on it. So I'd love to do more races. I'd love to try and do the Grand Prix as well. And I've still got a few things trying to, I've got a few things in the oven trying to work on there. But for right now, we're just here focusing on, what's next, and that's the Indy 500.
Tell us a little bit about Tom Burns, because I know for many fans that just got into the IndyCar Series the last few years probably don't necessarily recognize a lot about that name.
Yeah, so Tom used to run cars back in the late 80s and early 90s. He used to be a racing driver himself for many, many years. He's been a part of the whole IndyCar world. And he was part of Lazier Burns Racing in 2016. So he's had his hand in racing for a very long time. And, it was really cool to be able to link up with him in the United States Air Force and Dale. It's just a good combination. So I think we've got a really cool program for the whole month. Hopefully if we can add the Grand Prix, that would be even more special for me. But yeah, until then, we're just going to focus on what we can do and get the car ready for the 500.
Talking to Connor Daly here in practice at ISM Raceway. We see Robert Wiggins out of the racetrack. Hey, your impressions, what did you think of that first race in St. Petersburg? A lot to talk about with the way that finish went down.
Yeah, I was spotting, so I got to see a lot of it, and I saw everything happen in turn one. So it was crazy, man. I mean, we all know that Robert probably should have deserved a shot at Formula One. So I think he's an incredibly talented driver, really deserving of this ride in IndyCar without a doubt. And I think he's going to be strong quite often this season. But I think they've got such a great team over there with him and Hinch, to me, two incredible talents and a lot of great engineering strength over there. So I think what we're going to see, though, for the first few races is a lot of different teams sort of making appearances at different times until this is still a very new car, a very new program. So I think you'll see some teams sort of going up, down. Penske. I mean, we know Penske's not going to finish, ninth, for that often. So I think that'll be really cool to see how each team kind of goes through the development process of this new car.
All right, hey, good seeing you. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you in May.
Thanks a lot.
That's Connor Daly, of course, going to be driving for Tom Burns Racing. It's a partnership with Dale Quinn Racing. He's a proud American, and the U.S. Air Force is going to be on the side pods of that car, Mark Janes, in the month of May.
And we're working on having Connor join us in the booth for a couple of shows next weekend when we get the Toyota Grand Prix of Long Beach. We're about 25 minutes into the one and only practice session before we go qualifying. Hinch, Hunter Ray, Andretti, Kaiser, Wiggins, the top five. Preparations continue for the Phoenix Grand Prix here at ISM Raceway.
Firestone presents Legendary Drives. The scariest thing in sports is a left turn, taking it over 220 miles an hour. Turn 1 at the Indy 500 demands everything a tire's got, putting 2.5 G's on them for 4 seconds. Once it's over, they only have to do it 199 more times. And if Firestone tires are so dependable they can handle turn 1, handle any turn you need. Whatever you drive a Firestone, the tire that drives IndyCar legends. The road to the Indy 500 starts now. The Indy Grand Prix of Alabama, presented by America's first returns to world-famous Bowman Motorsports Park, April 20th and 22nd. The fastest race car drivers in the world will do battle, armed with 700 horsepower and 1,600 pounds of pure thunder. Fear is not an option. Failure is the enemy. Victory is the only thing that matters. Tickets are going fast. RaceEvents.com. From the Firestone Tires to ISM Raceway,
reached that point now, Anders, where it's go to a racetrack, come home, wash the clothes, dry them, repack them, and get back on the road. And we're off and running for the next several weeks. In fact, if you include testing coming up at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, in addition to the IndyCar Grand Prix, then of course qualifying, and the Indy 500 is a wonderful time of the year for sure.
Well, I'm glad you reminded me to wash my clothes, because I had actually completely forgotten about that. No, it is. We are coming into the busy season, and now is really when I start getting excited, because you kind of get to learn the patterns of who's strong on what type of track. We're going to see 3 completely different tracks here in the span of 3 weeks. We have this oval now with ISM Raceway. We've already seen the cars slipping and sliding about the surface. Then we're going to Long Beach, which should technically have a little bit of a similar trend to St. Pete, but again, the way the track drives, the way the car setups are, it's actually a pretty different beast altogether. So I think we're going to see another thing there entirely, and then obviously fast-flowing, high downforce, super stiff platforms at Barber Motorsports Park. And I think once we get through this trio of races, we'll know who's going to be the complete package this year.
Jim, now you've gone through the circuit one time, and you're starting on your second time through. The question that I get asked a lot just by fans, or if you're doing an interview for another entity or whatever, hey, what's your favorite racetrack? Well, we separate the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for obvious reasons, but I think the thing that makes the sport so great, and this form of it, is just the fact that no two places we go to are alike. And I'm talking about not only geographically and where they're located and the amenities they offer when we do get some downtime, but boy, each offer their own set of characteristics that make it a challenge, especially this year.
For sure, this place is among my favorites because a lot of the history here. And as a guy, I got to come in here and learn, listen, and just hear some of the legends talk about what they used to do here. Hear Mario talk about those kind of things. That's great. And then I loved Barber. Barber's a beautiful track to go out to. Obviously, I thought Watkins Glen was a great place to just visit. It had a very intimate feel to it. I kind of like that place. I'm disappointed that it's off the schedule, but I'm sure Portland will be great. But yeah, those are the ones that kind of strike me. Obviously, Indianapolis, I've never. That's number one, of course. Wouldn't say anything bad about Indianapolis, but no, this is kind of a treat to go anywhere right now. And like you said, I think Andrews was saying this is the best part of the schedule now, because now we get to kind of dive in, and it's you get to see who's done what over the offseason, what's paid off, what changes were made, and so this is like the most exciting part of the schedule. And all of a sudden it's May.
It's interesting to note that there's so much focus on points in the championship and the importance of each and every weekend, but what nobody talks about that when we get to just past the IndyCar Grand Prix. I mean, you win the 500, obviously the points are going to take care of themselves, but I mean, Simon Pagino said it once upon a time. You win there, it changes the way you're introduced, and that's why the focus maybe shifts away, and the points battle gets put on the shelf for the time being, and that's, I think, another thing that makes Indy so competitive.
For sure. I mean, you definitely have that focus shift from the championship over to Indy, and even, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, for the Grand Prix, it's a little bit like that. People are starting to kind of thinking about Indy, starting to think about the end of the month, what that means, and then you go to Detroit, and you kind of have to reshift back to the focus of the championships. It's a really interesting dynamic to watch these drivers go through as they go from the Grand Prix to the 500 back to Detroit.
Really cool to see the way, even though when we come back here next year, this ISM Raceway is going to look vastly different. We already see the changes, Anders, unfolding before our very eyes, but yet this year, probably more than any other in the time that I've been coming out here, it has reconnected with its past, most notably with the salute to Mario Andretti.
Yeah, exactly. They have indeed. But also, I think they've done a really good job of looking towards the future and what the future fans want. And me being constantly on my mobile device all the time, I can appreciate the fact that they want to make this a full-on Wi-Fi facility. So basically, wherever you are around here, you'll be connected. And all the different things that they're planning to do from an interactive perspective, I think, are going to be really, really cool. And I mean, just even looking out the booth here, looking at the different mountaintops and everything, it really is just a genuinely cool setting to be here. And to Jim's point, I think even here, no one's really thinking about points because no one has any idea who's going to be strong yet. So it's just a completely wide open goal at the moment, and I think that's why this race is going to be a good one because, again, no one knows where they are. And speaking of that, we talked about James having that moment. He's still somehow atop the charts, and so that means his car would have been incredibly free, incredibly on the edge. Very fast. It's not a race car, but yeah, you definitely want to have that car for qualifying if you can hang on to it.
After sessions, when you pose the question, Jim Aiello, to these drivers, well, what'd you think? At St. Pete, did you get a lot of glassed over, glossy-eyed? I really don't know what to think right now, more so than maybe the last year or the last couple of years.
No, the word that kept popping up for Graham Rahal, for James Hinchcliffe, was tricky. It's just tricky, and they couldn't. That was the word they kept going back to. And like with St. Pete, like we talked about, there was a lot of shaking of old habits. But Hinch was just talking about how those tires are wearing down so quickly, and he was talking about the stints, how long those stints are going to have to be. And he's like, "Boy, it's going to be a long ride, and it's just going to be tough." I think it's going to be the same here because these cars, they will last a lot longer. But the tires haven't changed much from last year, so it's going to be real interesting toward the end of stints.
I see Graham said something about maybe one less stop.
Here?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I know fuel mileage is better, but tire wear is way worse. And if he's planning on running up high, where there's clean air, then he's going to be wearing those tires even more because there's no rubber up there. So he's going to have those tires directly on the surface, and that's going to wear him out pretty quickly. So obviously he did that to perfection at Texas a couple of years ago. So I think he might be trying to do the same thing, but you just have to be so ginger with your inputs on the steering wheel and throttle input into the corners here, because if you crank too much steering input in the middle of the corner, you can burn these tires off in 10-15 laps. And really, we know that the tires are probably only good for 30, but really you want to get to 50-60 with the fuel mileage. So it's going to be interesting to see, and I think again we can see some completely wild strategies being played out. Someone being super aggressive and going just all out and just going for tire, whereas some other ones that might sit back for a little bit and try to do those longer runs. So it's going to be cool.
Fittipaldi, and Kyle Kaiser, those are a couple of the drivers. Spencer Pigot, even though he has the number of Verizon IndyCar Series starts under his belt. Talking about guys, this is their first experience here. Matthias Layst, Zach Veach ran an Indy Lights car here a couple of years ago, but interesting to note the number of drivers. Robert Wickens, another one. This is their first look at it, but Anders, do we think the gap is as big as maybe it would have been a year ago for these guys?
No,
Between them and the veterans?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to be much closer, and I think the guy that can quietly do a good job this weekend is Kyle Kaiser, because he dominated here in Indy Lights in 2016. I mean, just ran away with the field, and he wasn't far away from lapping the entire field. So he has a very nice feel for this. He's got the same core group of engineers behind him that he actually had back in his Indy Lights days. And Ernie, I'm actually looking at him right now down on the pit stand, and he's an engineering guru, and he had this place absolutely nailed with Kyle Kaiser a couple of years ago. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of transfer there that could give Kyle Kaiser some momentum here. Currently running 16, pretty good for Yukos Racing.
And Jim, Zach Veach, for one, has told us that this big car feels a little bit like that Lights car when they drop it.
Yeah, that's what he said. He said he feels a little bit more comfortable, but he's still trying to get adjusted, just like every other rookie. It has a little bit of similar feel, but it's still huge difference. So yeah, no, he's still in the learning process right now.
So as we watch them make their way around the course, Anders, so do we see any indications in this session that anyone is using this as an opportunity to get a higher groove in, or as you suspected, are we simply still working on qualifying sessions?
I think everyone's working on quality sessions, and everyone's also working on figuring out the gear ratios, because the wind is changing so drastically. Right now we have a big headwind into turn 1 and a big tailwind into turn 3, and that's going to drastically change not just the gear ratios that you're running, but also the handling of the car. So with headwind, that gives you a lot of grip going into turn 1, but then conversely going into turn 3, the car's going to feel like it's completely on top of the surface because you have the wind pushing your rear wing up and lifting you off the ground. So yeah, really tricky conditions here right now.
Defending series champion Joseph Newgarden is currently P5. An update on his session from Nick Yeoman.
Yeah, and I can back up what Anders is talking about in terms of guys setting these cars up right now for qualifying. We're not seeing very many of these drivers go out and turn runs of more than 4 or 5 laps. Joseph Newgarden just went out for a very, very short stint. He was one of those drivers that waited a long time to go to the racetrack and just turned a handful of laps, jumping all the way up to 5th. Now they've got the rear engine cowling off of that car of our defending series champ. A lot of looking right now at the right rear of that automobile, but as I say that, they're about to put the rear engine cowling back onto that car. Not seeing a whole lot of adjustments, but again, Newgarden goes out for a very short run and already finds some speed. Mark Janes, as you mentioned, jumped up into the top 5 here in time and scoring.
It's Rossi, Hunter Ray, Pagano, Newgarden the top 5, Kanaan, Jones, Layst, Dixon, and Pigot the top 10. Wickens 11th, Sato is 12th, Andretti is 13th, Carpenter 14th, Bourdais is 15th. Kaiser, Rahal, Power, Veach, and Kimball through 20th. Gabby Chavez 21st. Then Chilton and Fittipaldi back to pit road today first.
An opportunity to catch up with Al Unser Jr. Gabby Chavez, his driver, just came in, and after his very short run, of course, Al Jr. now an executive consultant with Harding Racing. What did Gabby have to say after that stint?
Well, so far it was really just how the car felt from coming from the race shop, and so everything looks pretty good. We're adding a little bit of tire pressure right now to it, and we'll go back out and get a better feel for it.
What a difference a couple of months can make for this team. You go back to the test in February, you guys barely had the car together when you're out here testing it. Now things have settled down just a little bit. What are the expectations for you guys this weekend?
Honestly, to win, but realistically, I think if we can run top 10, top 8, I think that'd be a great win to head into long range.
You had some momentum coming off the streets of St. Pete, qualified 8th, finished 14th, but overall, were you guys happy with that?
Yeah, we learned an awful lot, as far as the race strategies and so on. And so, we're really super proud about our qualifying effort. The job that Gabby did during the race, I think was phenomenal. We in the pits, we kind of messed up his strategy a little bit, but as far as the team was concerned, they made great stops, and Gabby did a great job. So.
When you think about how good this kid is on an oval, I mean, he's really taken to these things throughout the course of the season.
Exactly. That's, I've said it all along with his talent. We just need to put a horse underneath him, and he's going to go to the front. That's what we've been working on.
Great to be back in Phoenix. Your dad won here, I believe, 6 times. Uncle Bobby won here 4 times. I'm guessing you probably spent a lot of time as a youngster growing up in this place.
Yeah, we did actually. This is one of my favorite tracks coming from Albuquerque, and it's just a dang shame that we never did win it myself.
I was going to ask, whatever happened? I mean, you think about all the places you've won. There have been a couple places where you haven't. This is one of them.
It's just one of those things, I ran second here 3 or 4 times, something like that. It just never got that win. But that's the way it goes, There's Elkhart Lake was the same way. It's right there all the way.
Maybe Gabby and Victor Lane will take care of all that this weekend.
That'd be awesome.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Once again, Al Unser Jr., executive consultant for Harding Racing, as Gabby Chavez has made his way back to the oval here during this practice session.
Jumped in feet first on April Fool's Day when they posted that Al would be in a car for the Indianapolis 500. And Jim Aiello, it's permanent. It's a done deal. I mean, the sign has gone up over the entrance to the shop on Main Street at Speedway. They've settled in there, and what they've done has just been nothing short of miraculous over the last year or so with that race team.
Absolutely, and I'll just to be 100% honest with you, on April Fool's Day, I bought it for about a minute. I did. I looked at it and I was like, wait, what? And I clicked on the story and I read it and I'm like, what is happening? So they got me. I'll admit it. So yeah, I got a little worried. I was like, I'm start writing a story really fast here. I made some calls.
Well, first things first. This is not an easy place to get to on foot. It takes a little bit of work to do so, and your willingness to do it is something that we greatly appreciate. To that end, we know you have deadlines and work that you have to do, so we're going to cut you loose just a few minutes early so you can get back to the infield. But before we let you go, again, let people know where they can find you, your social media, and you post videos, interviews with drivers, and previews of events. Great job covering high school and pro sports and college sports during the off season, by the way. But let folks know where they can enjoy your race coverage all season.
Well, thank you very much. Let me join you guys up here. This was a lot of fun. At Jim Aiello on Twitter, at Jim Aiello on Facebook, and very similarly at Jim Aiello on Instagram. All those things, and you can read my work on IndyStar.com and USATodaySports.com.
I will get you up to our corner office there at 16th and Georgetown during the month of May. Once you get a game for that.
Sounds good to me.
All right, Jim Aiello from the Indianapolis Star joining us. We'll be back as preparation continues for Saturday night's race here at ISM Raceway.
Firestone presents Legendary Drives. It was the 1969 Indy 500 when Mario Andretti's crew couldn't get his right rear tire off. He had no choice but to drive on it the whole race, still finishing with a checkered flag and a drink of milk. Now that's legendary. And if Firestone tires are so dependable they can take Mario 500 grueling IndyCar miles, just imagine how far they'll take you. Whatever you drive, drive a Firestone, the tire that drives IndyCar legends.
The road to the Indy 500 starts now.
Green, 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 green.
The Honda Indy Grand Prix of Alabama, presented by America's First, returns to world-famous Barber Motorsports Park, April 20th through 22nd. The fastest race car drivers in the world will do battle, armed with 700 horsepower and 1,600 pounds of pure thunder. Fear is not an option. Failure is the enemy. Victory is the only thing that matters. Tickets are going fast. Get yours now at barberracingevents.com.
From the Firestone broadcast booth at ISM Raceway, this is the Verizon IndyCar Series.
Again, thanks to Jim Aiello from the Indianapolis Star for joining us for the first 40 minutes or so of the session. Joined now, of course, Anders Krohn, here, our driver analyst, but Jake Query pops to the booth for a few minutes. And Jake, so far, everyone looking up at James Hinchcliffe. He had a moment earlier, but he's finding the fast way around the racetrack. 181 824, Rossi, Hunter-Reay, Pagenaud, and Newgarden. And knock wood, if you will, been a fairly uneventful session to this point.
I saw one time, it was about 20 minutes ago or so, where Ryan Hunter-Reay went into turn number 3, and in doing so, he looked a little bit loose. Now, Anders, I don't know whether or not that's just because, as we know, and I think everybody said it during the test. I remember coming out here during the test and Sebastian Bourdais telling me, man, there are times these cars can just be really sketchy just in terms of the overall grip. Now, there are also there's the ability here to get some pretty good gusts that kind of come out of nowhere in terms of the breeze. So maybe the wind plays into that. But pardon me if you guys talked about it a little bit earlier, but when you get this sun-drenched track, and it's obviously hot here, the air's not thick, but it is hot. I would think that at times, those tires, it's got to get pretty slick at different periods of the track.
It definitely can do. As the rubber gets in, it can get very greasy. But I think the issue that Ryan Hunter-Reay had going into Turn 3 is the fact that we already have several thousand pounds less downforce than we did last year, and then you have the tailwind to add to that, which just lifts the rear of the car up and can make it oh so loose. And if you kind of want some perspective, some numbers on how downforce levels play into this. So at St. Petersburg, we set a new track record with Jordan King during qualifying, and a large part of the reason is the cars are much straighter in a straight line now than they were last year, but through the corners they're a little bit slower, and especially the high-speed corners. Now here, currently, James Hinchcliffe, who's running P1, is 14 miles an hour slower than the pole position last year with Elio Castroneves. So that's just how crucial the overall downforce levels helps around a short oval like this one. So I can only imagine the drivers right now just how difficult these cars are to manhandle, because you just don't have the same amount of grip. You can't put the same amount of steering input in. You can't handle it as aggressively as you usually would. And so I think these guys have been spoiled the last few years with just having so much downforce around here that you basically could do whatever you want with the car. And now it's so much more sensitive.
A guy that had a good test, really, I thought, and was fairly impressive, is that of the rookie Pietro Fittipaldi, who was, I think, 15th fastest of those that came out here, but hasn't necessarily translated for him here in terms of this particular session. Maybe not a lot of seat time of going out there and turning laps. He's done 26 laps, but it looks like, Anders, that things have changed a little bit from what he was able to find in terms of a comfort zone at the test.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if the team gave him a somewhat of a conservative setup at the test. They would have probably put more downforce on the car than they normally would have to just make him comfortable. And so I think also in colder conditions, downforce levels go up as the air gets more saturated. So it just gives you a bit more security. But now with as warm as it is, the car's already floating on top of the surface. And then the team's going to be telling you, oh, by the way, we're going to take off downforce to get you ready for qualifying here. So this is birth by fire for Pietro, but I think he's done a fine job of getting up to speed and not making any mistakes. And onboard footage with Marco Andretti, and he gets loose in turn 3-4.
They may want to go back to the USAC paddock before we go qualifying today and talk to a handful of those drivers that are running here this weekend.
And you can see on the way into the corner, he's already correcting the car maybe 10, 12 times going into the corner, and then finally, once the front grips up, he has a big snap loose. And again, as a driver, that's just a terrible feeling. And what they're doing right now is they're trying to figure out how aggressive can we go with the setup of the car for qualifying while still keeping it out of the barrier. And that's not an easy thing. And right now, I wish we had access to Marco Andretti's radio, because I bet he's going to be pretty animated.
Well, we saw him when he came onto pit road and he was visiting with the crew. I mean, as Marco often does, and Jake's been down there on pit road on more than one occasion and witnessed that firsthand. He gets pretty demonstrative when he's unhappy with the race car. You see him talking with his hands a lot while he's got the helmet on, and that's exactly what I saw when I was looking at the monitor a few minutes ago. Now, a team that maybe didn't end up with the results that they would have liked, but I think had a very solid debut weekend with the two new drivers, talking about the veteran Tony Kanaan and the rookie Matheus Leis, talking about A.J. Foyt and ABC Supply. They currently find themselves P6 and P8. Now, Leis had an interesting test. He was a challenge for the wall painters here over the course of that test, but I think, much has been written, especially of late, of the fact that I think they're ready to step their game up and be competitive as a race team.
Absolutely, big time, and you just see it because they've been strong at every track they've gone to so far. And last year, if you remember, it was basically only Gateway where A.J. Foyt Racing were strong, where both Connor Daly as well as Munoz were running near the front. But yeah, now it looks like they've got the whole package together. And just thinking back to how well Matheus Leis was doing in the streets of St. Petersburg, running up front, doing a fine job, and had it not been for that mechanical issue, he could have been challenging for the win there. So they've made a tremendous step forward, and I'm a big fan of the driver lineup there with Tony Kanaan with all the experience, and then just the young hunger of Matheus Leis. I think that's a really good dynamic as a team.
And AJ is now 2-0 against Killer Bees, from what we understand.
Well, I'll tell you what, he had another scare at his ranch where he was on his tractor and he went over, a nest of the killer bees that came out and had massive stings. That's not the first time it's happened to him. And, Robin Miller was passing out kind of a T-shirt in joke and in jest, Mark, that said Grim Reaper 0 and, A.J. Foyt 83, Grim Reaper 0. He has had a lot of lives. Fascinating life in general for A.J. Foyt, and obviously happy to see that he's okay. He's had a couple of health scares over the last few years, but once again, Super Tex is there. You just saw him on the fruit stand, and yeah, absolutely, he's got to be happy with that mixture, the young and the more veteran of Tony Kanaan, and then, of course, Matheus Leis, and the two feeding off of one another and how fast they've been so far. They were good at the test, Mark. As you mentioned, Matheus Leis had a couple of white-knuckle moments there at the test, but they certainly rolled off with pretty fast race cars here in Phoenix.
Anders, how important is this race for Team Penske mentally after doing no better than 7th at St. Petersburg? Very, very un-Penske-like.
Yeah, it was, but I think last year they almost had an unfair advantage here because they had the Chevy Aero kit, which had so much more downforce. So now it's much more of a level playing field, and we see that here with 3 Hondas at the top and then 3 Chevys following immediately thereafter. So it's a lot more level. But again, I think in typical Penske fashion, what they really just need to do is keep building the momentum into the season. Where they really started shining last year was that they just started on the second half of the season. That's when they really got wind in their sails and started dominating the season. So I wouldn't be surprised that, again, if they have a bit of a measured approach to this particular weekend and then really start unleashing it a couple of races down the line.
They had a pretty good test at Barber for sure, Jake.
Let me ask you, and with these cars, Mark, and that's what's interesting about when we're talking about tests and everything else, and the fact that this is still new for the most part, and maybe some of these teams, even with a good test and through practices and qualifying, maybe it's midway through the race before you finally feel you have it dialed in or figured out. But I'm curious about this, Anders, as somebody who's been in the cockpit. Ideally, you'd like to think that as a driver, you are the one in control at all times of putting the car where it needs to go. Realistically, what percentage, especially in cars like this that have a little bit more freedom, especially in the rear of the race car, what percent of the time is the car responding to where you're putting it versus you simply being a driver that is responding to where the car itself is wanting to go? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, I tell you, the telling tale of a great oval driver is one that will do exactly what you're saying, be able to go where the car wants to take you.
Right.
If the car gets bound up or gets snap oversteer or does something nasty on the normal racing line, it's having the creative mind to think, okay, I need to go higher even though it's a conventional line, or vice versa. And it's absolutely that. So I think that, the key to being a good oval driver, and especially around a place like this where basically you're running in the wake of other cars the entire lap, and that takes away so much grip, so much balance, and we know just how much front grip these cars lose with running in dirty air. That, you're absolutely right. It's going to be down to the driver that figures out where the car wants to go, and it takes me back again to Sebastian Bourdais, Milwaukee Mile 2014, when he had that absolutely figured out. I still have the memories in my head of just how much higher he entered the corners than anyone else, and the runs that he would get off corners because of it. He was able to manage traffic better. He was able to overtake better. He was saving his tires. So you're exactly spot on. That is a huge key to being successful, especially around a place like this.
To pit road and Dave first.
You know, this series always welcomes new programs, sponsors, and the like. Dave Tilton is a retired Navy veteran, founder of military-to-motorsports.com, which is on the side of Alexander Rossi's car this week. It's a hiring initiative to place veterans with jobs within the racing community. And first things first, how did you guys hook up the team and this initiative, Dave?
Well, Michael Andretti and I decided that we wanted to bring some veterans into the racing world because the way that they work in the military space is very similar to the way these guys on the teams work. Very closely, very hard workers, never give up attitude. So Michael and I decided that we wanted to try this initiative to get some of those heroes back over here to the racing side.
It's all about the transition to civilian life, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, these military veterans out there, they work so hard, and the only thing they know is the military. So we feel that it's up to us to help them transition over to the private world, and no better way than to let them have a soft transition to something that they know very well, and that's another type of team.
How long do you and Michael go back?
Michael and I go back about 4 or 5 years, starting back with Scott Speed and Global Rallycross, and then he convinced me to go into the chassis ownership program about 2 years ago, and we went from there.
Okay, so this transitions into something very special. You purchased Takuma Sato's Indy 500 winning chassis, but that was before the Indy 500 last year, right?
Absolutely. It was the December before, and Michael asked me if I wanted to be a chassis owner, and we sat in the office, and he told me, he says, I got a couple of Speedway cars. He says, you've got a choice between Alexander Rossi's car, who just won the Indy 500, and Takuma Sato, who's a new guy to our team, and we're trying to bring him up to speed. And I said, I've just got this weird feeling. I think I'm going to go with Takuma Sato. And lo and behold, 5 months later, here we are standing in winner's circle at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
That is a heck of a sixth sense you've got.
Yeah, you know, it's a great tribute to all of these guys that work with Andretti. It was all the team that did it all. I just happened to be along for the ride.
And again, the name of the initiative is?
The initiative, the military-to-motorsports.com, and we really want everybody to go there so they can come out here and help these veterans to transition from the military world along with their families over here to the private communities.
Really great meeting you. Thank you for your service. Have fun this weekend, okay?
Thank you very much. It was my honor.
Again, Dave Tilton, founder of military-to-motorsports.com. They'll be on the car for Alexander Rossi, that 27 machine, here this weekend.
Great stuff, Dave. Great cause for sure. And that's a great story. And hats off to Andretti Autosport. A little bit farther up pit road, let's check in with Dick Gelman.
Yeah, speaking of Andretti Autosport, we got a new number one on timing and scoring as Ryan Hunter-Reay has become the first driver to post a lap at over 182 miles an hour. He brought that DHL Honda back to pit lane, and there was about 10 minutes left in practice, and I wasn't sure, Mark, if they were going to call it a session or not, because that is an awful impressive speed in this really hot portion of the day. But as I say that, they've put on 4 fresh Firestone tires. They've lowered that car off the air jack, so I think Ryan Hunter-Reay may go back onto the racetrack and try to improve that lap time. Again, 182.010 miles per hour. That's flat getting around this place as he is at the top of timing and scoring charts in that DHL Honda for Andretti Autosport.
So Ryan Hunter-Reay goes to P1, and believe it or not, it's been a little while since Ryan Hunter-Reay has been in victory lane, and he could think of no better time nor place to change that than right here at ISM Raceway. Got another look at Marco's latest venture out at ISM Raceway. Literally and figuratively had his hands full.
It shook me. I mean, just looking at the amount of corrections he had in the middle of the corner, that was crazy. And I think they probably just went a little too aggressive on the quali sim there. Just probably took a little too much aero off the car, or maybe went a little too stiff overall with the platform, because that car is just moving on top of the surface. And again, as a driver, when you're on an oval and the car moves on top of the surface and you can't feel the rear of the car where it's going and it's taking a set, that's just a horrible feeling. As Simon Pagenaud to the top, just beating out Ryan Hunter-Reay by 1/10 of a mile an hour.
Ryan Hunter-Reay, James Hinchcliffe, Sebastian Bourdais, and Alexander Rossi are top 5. Then Newgarden, Kanaan, Laced, Ed Jones, and Scott Dixon, the top 10. Kaiser, 11th. Wickens, 12th. Power, Andretti, and Piggott, the top 15. 16th, Rahal. 17th, Sato. 18th, Ed Carpenter. Zach Veach is 19th. Kimball is 20th. Chilton is 21st. 22nd is Gabby Chavez. Fittipaldi is 23rd. How about the ride that Kyle Kaiser's given it so far in this session? 11th quick at 178.541.
Yeah, and again, he just absolutely loves this place. Again, he dominated here a few years ago in Indy Lights, so I'm actually not that shocked here. And boy, oh boy, how cool would it be if he were to qualify inside the top 10. But the biggest surprise at the moment is Takuma Sato, only down in 17th. He was so quick here during the test, and I thought, yeah, he could potentially be a runaway winner here. But again, just a testament to how much the conditions have changed and how much their car must have suited the colder conditions. And now that it's hotter and the cars are sliding around a bit more, they just don't have it.
Is there any chance, Anders, that when you talk about Sato, any chance, because so much was coveted for Graham Rahal of having that teammate to have, to share information with this year after working so long as a lone wolf, any chance that Sato right now, it's strictly that he's on a setup where they want to do something? Hey, let's just try nothing but race setups. Let's get as much downforce in. Let's find out where the car responds. And it's just not as free, and that's why he's not seeing the speed.
Yeah, I really don't think so. I think at this point that they should be 100% focused on just qualifying because, again, the conditions we're seeing right now are completely dissimilar to what we're going to see in the race tomorrow. So I think they could really actually drive themselves down a completely wrong path if they focused on race setup right now, because the setup that's working today in the heat isn't going to be the same setup that works tomorrow night. So I don't think they would do that. What I do think they are, though, is they're probably on two very different packages. They're probably evaluating some different combinations of mechanical and aero setup across the two cars, and then after this session, they're probably going to come together on a collective setup here. So that's probably what they are working on.
I'm guessing that debrief for Graham's going to be a bit more enjoyable and beneficial after these sessions than it was maybe a year ago, having the benefit of that teammate for sure. Let's go to pit road, get an update from Nick Yeoman.
Yeah, Ryan Hunter-Ray has taken that DHL car back out of the racetrack. He's now gotten bumped down to 4th on timing and scoring as 3 other drivers now have joined him in the 182-mile-per-hour range. Tony Kanaan, Simon Pagenaud, Sebastian Bourdais, the 3 that have jumped Hunter-Ray. But let's put this into perspective. We talk about how fast these guys are getting around here, up around 182 miles per hour. We talk about what the drivers feel in the race car and what it certainly feels like down here on pit lane. But you don't have to look any further than from the timing and scoring charts from that test session when we saw drivers turning laps up around 189 miles an hour. We almost got into 190 mile per hour range during that test session. So sure, it's a handful for these drivers, Mark, but you don't have to look any further. The track just doesn't have the speed as it does when the sun goes down here at Phoenix, and it's backing it up here in this first practice session.
We questioned as to how some of these drivers would feel after the St. Pete weekend with the difference in the car and how it handles and how it drives. Get any impression that we were on the mark? Did you talk to any drivers expressing some concern about how they felt when the show was over?
No, I haven't heard a single complaint following St. Pete. However, I have a distinct feeling we could come out of tomorrow with some drivers saying, oh, the cars are way too light on downforce and it doesn't handle the way that I'd like it to. But I think that's kind of a short oval like this is very much a love-hate relationship. You either have the car absolutely dialed and you're building confidence, you're building momentum during the course of the weekend, and everything is just working beautifully, or you're having just the worst time of your life in trying to just hang on to it. And so it's an oval is a bit bipolar in that sense, in that it's you never go through one of these weekends just saying it was okay. It's either the one or the other.
182.313 and look who went to P1, the 14 of A.J. Foyt ABC Supply. Tony Kanaan is now P1 at 182.313. You know, Jacob, that TuneIn app, download it, log on there, the IMS Radio Network. You get broadcasts from the past, and listening to one a couple of years ago the other day, as Tony Kanaan is happy with that lap and parks it on pit road. And you know, having been out on the course myself, you've been out in turn 3 now for a number of years. You were in turn 2 for years prior to that. No question, when Tony Kanaan takes the lead at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the energy level just goes off the charts.
It's the most popular victory there that I have seen, Mark, when Tony Kanaan won the Indianapolis 500, because he just had knocked on the door so many times. And I think it reminded so many people of drivers that they had watched for years that were in that same boat that never were able to break through, the Joe Leonards, the Lloyd Rubies of the world. You know, that TuneIn app also for IndyCar Radio, you just download the TuneIn app and then you will see the icon for IndyCar Radio or IMS Radio Network, technically speaking, if you type that in. It's fantastic, Mark, because I'll, be doing something or decide to check it out and turn it on, and literally the last 2 or 3 times I've done so, they're just getting ready to take the green flag at the last two times that I heard it, the 1968 Indianapolis 500 and the 1980 Indianapolis 500, and just to be able to listen to some of it. And it's funny. I can listen to that 1980 Indianapolis 500 and remember exactly where I was listening to it then. And then I listened to the race from, say Long Beach a year ago, and I have no recollection of the calls you and I did. Those guys were just more memorable than we are, Mark. That's the reality of it.
More talented, you name it.
Yeah.
I mean.
You're just in an autopilot, I guess, but it is so much fun to listen to that and to be able to hear some of the great races and great drivers from yesteryear.
Checkered flag flies, and we mentioned Tony Kanaan parked it just a handful of laps before. He's already in the midst of the debrief, and Simon Pagenaud at the very last moment. He goes back to P1. So Pagenaud, Kanaan, Bourdais, Hunter Ray, and Rossi the top 5. Then Hinch, Jones, Newgarden, Layston, Wickens the top 10. And more importantly, Anders, we were a little concerned about the ability to hold on. And not that it wasn't a handful for a couple of drivers. The ones that we saw evidence of that would be Hinch and Marco Andretti. But, gosh, let's face it, all in all, I think it was a good first session.
It was a good first session, but I think everyone were just being very, very cautious in general here, and we got a good shot, actually, of Tony Khan expressing the handling of the car, and he did the same exact thing that I witnessed happen to Marco Andretti, is that in the middle of turn 3, the car just tends to snap loose, and you have to constantly catch it. So that's exactly what Tony Kanan's gonna work on going into qualifying, the ability to just have the car so underneath you that you know exactly what you can do with it, and a lot of that is going to come down to the wind as well. We've had a fairly steady head-on wind here into turn 1 during this session, but it's constantly changing. And so if that changes for qualifying, that could put a whole another thing into the works here.
Interesting to note that we talked about the level playing field, that some of those with less experience here may have as we enter this race weekend, but look at the experience that sits at the top of timing and scoring as we speak.
Yeah, and Simon Pagenaud has sort of become a bit of a master on the short ovals as of late, and showing it here again. He's got a tremendous amount of faith in his car at the moment, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Will Power and Joseph Newgarden adopting whatever setup Simon has on his car, because it's clearly working really well.
Dave First is on pit road with Tony Kanaan.
And TK, P1 after that practice session. What did you learn?
P2.
Oh, P2. Simon Pagenaud got you there at the very end.
Yeah, but it's a lot different in the test. So
much different, huh?
Yeah, it's a lot slower, a lot hotter. That's why. But we're gonna have a lot of work to do for qualifying. I'm still not happy with the car, but I guess everybody else is struggling as well. So we'll see what we're gonna do.
Are you ready for qualifying? You have this thing figured out for that session?
Not yet, but we'll be.
What will happen this afternoon, you think? You get back out, that's that final practice. There's a lot of talk about maybe trying to, tire in, rubber up a second groove. Do you think that'll happen? What will happen, you think, today?
We're going to try. I mean, tonight's the time to try it, IndyCar and ISM Raceway did a great job with, I think you guys saw the
tire dragging.
Tire dragging, and let's see if it's going to work. We got to try it. So we talk a little bit about, trying to run the high line a little bit this afternoon, so we'll see. I'll try.
Good luck this afternoon. We'll talk to you then.
Thank you.
TK off to get weighed in, as all the drivers are as well. And Mark Janes, if you look ahead to the month of May, proud to announce that TK will be once again our driver analyst on RTV6's Trackside 6 coverage in the ABC affiliate in Indianapolis. So we look forward to that as well. This is like 8 years and going for TK and I, and he and I both have become great friends over that time. But great to have TK back 2018 Trackside 6.
Yep, good stuff. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate TK's time as well. Let's hear from Alexander Rossi. He's with Nick Yeoman.
Yeah, top 5 in practice for Alexander Rossi. Overall feeling, I know these aren't race conditions, but how'd that car feel?
It's a lot lower grip than the test for sure. It's about 25 degrees hotter, so it's hard to work out there. But I think the car, we rolled off pretty strong, so that's always a positive. The trick here is, as qualifying starts, it starts to get dark. So it's going to be quite a show for the fans tonight under the lights, or at dusk rather, and hopefully we can have a good race car and put it on pole.
All right, good practice session for Alexander Rossi, who ends up in the top 5 when it's all said and done, Mark.
And again, a busy day here. We'll take a break for a couple of hours. You can join us at 5 p.m., 8 p.m. Eastern, we should say, as we get ready for qualifying here for the Verizon IndyCar Series. And then one final session tonight, 8 o'clock local time, before we go racing tomorrow night. One of the things, Jim Aiello from the Indianapolis Star for being our guest a little bit earlier today. Great stuff from Nick Yeoman today first, as always, on pit road. The director of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network and IndyCar Radio is Wally Levitt. Our on-site engineer and producer is Rick Evans. For Jake Query and Anders Crone, Mark.
IndyCar Radio. From ISM Raceway in Avondale, Arizona, this is the Verizon IndyCar Series on the Advance Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network.
Desert Diamond West Valley Casino Phoenix Grand Prix. As we get ready for the final tune-up before tomorrow night's race, Mark James from ISM Raceway, driver analyst Anders Crone joining me in the broadcast booth, and a pretty spirited qualifying session. Didn't know what the starting grid would look like definitively. In terms of the pole sitter, boy, Team Penske looked pretty comfortable. Then all of a sudden, Sebastian Bourdais changed all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And how they made that happen was just simply astonishing, the way they just came out and laid it all out there. And, yeah, I think we all expected Penske to end up dominating that session, but that was not the case whatsoever. And but I think everyone kind of went into that qualifying session not being too concerned with the outcome, just simply because the conditions are going to be so different tomorrow night. And that's why this session is what everyone's saying, this is the one we all care about. We need to figure out the raceability of the cars, how we can place them high, low, wherever they want to go.
Frenchman dominating the front row. In fact, as we mentioned, Team Penske felt pretty comfortable, I think, although they understood what they were facing toward the end of that qualifying session. At the very last minute, Bourdais knocking Simon Pagenaud off of P1. They'll start together on the front row.
Yeah, that's going to be great right there. And I think Simon Pagenaud is going to have good momentum on the outside, so I wouldn't be surprised to see if he can carry some good speed and be alongside Bourdais into turn one. He might be able to swoop around the outside, and certainly a lot of momentum for Simon Pagenaud from that big win last year.
A couple of newcomers gave it a pretty good ride. How about Pietro Fittipaldi on the outside of row number 5? You were impressed with the run that Kyle Kaiser had. He was at the top of timing and scoring for a while. He will roll off, though, on the outside of row number 7, but really a good, solid effort out of Kyle Kaiser.
Yeah, that was such a spirited run. Considering they're a one-car team, that's got to be so difficult coming out here and having no data except the one on your car, and then to do what they did was just great, and yeah, really shows well the fact that he did so well here in Indy Lights, and carries that over into IndyCar.
Two guys that I think hoped for a better effort inside of row number 9, Scott Dixon, Marco Andretti on the outside of row number 10.
Yeah, and actually I just saw an image on Twitter of Marco Andretti's bottom side of his car. He actually had a skid plate that was scrubbing the bottom of the surface, so he was actually bottoming out big time, so that explained his issues. But with Scott Dixon, I think they just got caught being a little too conservative on the overall setup and had too much push in the car.
Pit stop practice session before we have the proverbial all skate. They're doing it in groups of 3, giving them an opportunity to get some work on the pit stops under pretty close to race conditions before we go racing tomorrow night. Happy to have with us in the broadcast booth. Not racing here tonight, but what a debut with the Verizon IndyCar Series at St. Pete. I know the result was not what he had hoped for, but up until that point, a really, really solid debut for Jordan King, who's sharing the ride with Ed Carpenter, and Ed Carpenter Racing here in 2018. First of all, welcome to the broadcast booth. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Your
Thanks
thoughts and impressions of the effort at St. Petersburg, your weekend as a whole?
I think the effort was very good. I was happy with how everything went, other than the final result.
Yeah.
It was a little bit annoying going off 4th, leading the race for a couple of laps, and then picking up the puncher, which hampered our result. But overall, it was very positive.
So the folks who wonder, okay, how did this all happen for you? How did you end up with Ed Carpenter Racing?
Well, I first met Ed actually back in 2016, and I suppose from then on it was a long time coming in hindsight, but we started proper dialogue beginning of last year, midway through last year, to look to really come here and hit the ground with a bang. But as these things always take a while, it wasn't until kind of Christmas time really that everything was sorted out, and a month later I was on a plane over to America.
At what point was your interest piqued? What was it? Any one thing in particular that made this something you would pursue?
No, nothing in particular, it's always been in the corner of my eye. Obviously, growing up in Europe, Formula One was my first port of call. But I've always watched it, you know, the 500 being something that's always been on TV. So I've always seen that, always seen the races, and there's always been quite a strong representation from Europe. So I've kind of had people that I've known over here racing. So that made it easier for me to stay engaged back home. So when the decision came to actually come over here, it wasn't a difficult one. I'd known the championship for a while.
So with all the experience that you've had in all the forms of racing, how did it feel to be called a rookie at St. Petersburg?
Yeah, well, there's been a bit of a joke of you know, everyone's always saying I'm a rookie, which is true. There's a lot for me to learn for this championship, for the tyres, for the car, for the engine, for the circuits. You know, every circuit for me is new. So, you know, in that sense, I truly am a rookie. But precisely to what you said, I've been racing now for 12 years, something like that. You know, other rookies like Robert Wickens, who's doing really well. You know, if anything, he probably shouldn't be called a rookie for how much experience he's done. But the rules are what the rules are. So we're all rookies, and we're having fun doing so.
Ed Carpenter Racing's Jordan King is our guest in the broadcast booth. So does being here make you scratch the itch at all? Do you want to? Would you like to tackle a place like Phoenix?
Yes, I would like to do a race. I think it would definitely be jumping in the deep end with a very, very deep bottom to the pool. But I've driven here once before after the official test, so I know roughly which way it goes and all that.
All right.
But yeah, there's still a lot to learn when it comes to these circuits as a very specialist.
I actually spoke to your team owner a little bit earlier, and I said, had you won that race in St. Pete, would you have been on the grid here in Phoenix? And I would have fully expected him to say absolutely he would have been. But he actually claims that he was, 100% set in the plan as a two-car team. But do you think that there's any chance whatsoever that if the season goes far above expectation that you'll be on an oval at some point this year, or is that just not in the cards at the moment?
It's not something that I particularly thought about or put a lot of time into it. I wouldn't say no to jumping on an oval. You know, if someone turned around to me tomorrow and said, we've got a car you can run at the 500, I'd definitely say yes. But I started the season knowing what I was doing, and in my mind that was the box I was in, so I focused on that. It's gone very well so far, probably a lot better than I first expected, but then in the same sense I always wanted it to go this well, so it's not been a surprise in that sense.
To show you how the serious race control is about the specific rules involving this pit stop practice session, drivers are not allowed at all on the front straightaway. And Jordan, you want to turn your monitor down so you can't really see this. Ed Carpenter stayed out for a lap, so the session for the 20 is done. So that ruling coming from race control. Of course, we're here at ISM Raceway. The name has changed. It was Phoenix International Raceway for a long, long time. Just in the time that we had been going since February when we came here for the test, a $170 million plus renovation is underway, and Nick Yeoman has more on that.
Yeah, we're here with Brian Sperber, who's the track president here at ISM Raceway in Phoenix, Arizona. We'll talk a little bit about that massive project that you guys have going on in just a moment, but your impressions so far of the weekend, these drivers, these new race cars, obviously had a chance to test here a month ago. Your impressions of the IndyCar Series and the momentum it carries this weekend?
Well, so far it's been really exciting, and I think, with the qualifying that we saw, I don't think a lot of people had Sebastian Bourdais penciled in as our pole winner, so that was really fun and unexpected, and we saw some different names up at the top of the board, but, we're getting ready to light off practice here, and I think a lot of things are going to shake out, and we'll get a good picture maybe of what we're going to see in tomorrow night's race, but so far it's been a lot of fun. The weather here has been great, and it looks like the cars are performing really well.
How nice has the relationship been with the folks from Desert Diamond West Valley Casino, once again the title sponsor of this event?
Yeah, we really appreciate their support. And of course, it's always great when you have a local company that's getting behind what you're doing and helping us to spread the word and promote the race here in the Valley.
All right, let's talk about the massive project, because over a year for the last couple now, it's changed a little bit for race fans that tune in maybe on NBCSN tomorrow night or listening on IndyCar Radio. They're going to hear us talk about it as well. This massive project that you guys have going on, it seems like you are right in the midst of it. A lot of work being done here in the Phoenix area.
Yeah, there is. It's $178 million. I call it a transformation because we really are changing everything other than the race surface here at ISM Raceway will be changed. So fans coming in November to the big grand opening are going to see a leading edge, brand spanking new motorsports and entertainment facility. But we've got a lot of work to do between now and then. And as they said in Smokey and the Bandit, we got a long way to go and a short time to get there. But we're really confident that we're going to have a brand new midway, brand new bar and grill, escalators, elevators for the fans, brand new seats, flip down seats with cup holders throughout the entire venue. The facility will be fully Wi-Fi enabled. I believe we're going to be the first racetrack in the country that'll be fully Wi-Fi enabled, which allows us to take advantage of a lot of technology opportunities. There's a brand new tunnel that will connect the new grandstand area to the infield. Today we have what I would call a working infield. Come November, this is going to be a real entertainment zone. We'll have bars and restaurants here, access to the garage area, to the driver's meeting, to all sorts of technology, including fans for the first time will have access to Gatorade Victory Lane at the end of the race. They'll be able to come in and celebrate with their hero that just won the event. So all of these things are going to be up and running come November. I couldn't be more excited about it. It's going to be great.
Ryan Sperber, the track president here at ISM Raceway, joins us on the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network. For fans that are here this weekend, though, I know you talked about there's some amenities that they can already take advantage of, right?
That's correct. So the trackside bar and grill is up and running. And I was just over there earlier where there's some fans enjoying some cold beverages. And I'm sure they're watching the practice right now over there, having a great time. And one of our, we call them a canyon. It's a grand entryway with escalators and elevators. That's open and operational for this weekend as well. But really the lion's share of all the construction, all the amenities will come online starting in November.
I was blown away. I had a chance to drive over to kind of that main entrance here, and I was blown away with how impressive it is. And the final thing is this is very fan-oriented. I've heard you talk about all these things, especially Victory Lane. What a cool opportunity. You guys are really going to make this into a fan-friendly place to come watch the race.
Yeah, we absolutely had the fans in mind. When we designed the entire venue, I was just telling some folks earlier about, they were asking why we built the new grandstands on the side of the racetrack that we did. And the answer is simple. It's shade. And here in the Valley of the Sun, I can tell you, being able to be in the shade is a premium. And, you know, we love our fans, but those that have chosen to sit on the front stretch all these years, we're really getting baked by the sun. And they're troopers. They hung in there with us. And they've certainly supported the racetrack through thick and thin. And it's nice that we're going to be able to now transition those fans over into incredibly comfortable individual seats in the shade. It's going to make such a huge difference. And we're going to move the start-finish line over there as well. And so they're going to be able to see the start and the finish of the race right in front of those seats, enjoying cold beverage in the shade. Beautiful weather here in the Valley. It really doesn't get any better than that.
Brian, we really appreciate your accessibility. Hoping that IndyCar and ISM Raceway relationship continues, and best of luck with what is really a spectacular, one-of-its-kind project here in Phoenix.
Well, thanks so much. We love having IndyCar here. It's the heart and soul of our racetrack, and it's going to be a great weekend.
All right, that's Brian Sperber, the track president of ISM Raceway. Mark, it is an incredible project they have going on here.
Good stuff, Nick Yeoman. And as we mentioned, Jordan Kingsman, Carpenter Racing, joins us for this final practice session before we go racing tomorrow night. And Jordan, your thoughts and impressions when you arrived at St. Pete, just the difference in the fan interaction, the accessibility that the fans have. Maybe, you know, we've had Rubens Barrichello over the years come to the Verizon IndyCar Series. Certainly Alexander Rossi, Sebastian Bourdais was away for a while and came back. Fernando Alonso a year ago. Those guys always seem to be blown away at the accessibility and really enjoy that interaction with the fans.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest difference. Formula One's starting to get there now with the new ownership, and I really think they are trying. But compared to IndyCar, you know, on the grid in St. Pete, trying to get into the car, it was like wading through treacle with how many fans there are, which, you know, in Formula One, it's such an exclusive club on the grid, there's actually almost nobody there. So just the difference is that you want engagement here where there's not so much of it back in Europe.
Let's talk a little bit about this race team from a driver's perspective. Advantage driving for a driver? I mean, it's been around the sport a long time. He's driven a lot of different things going back to his USAC days. I mean, not only is I don't think he gets enough credit for being the businessman that he is and having the business acumen that he does, because people know him primarily as a racer. But what's that like from your perspective?
I completely agree with you on that one. But from a personal side, he's been a massive help on and off the track. Just little things when we come in after a session, sitting in the pit lane, just little bits of advice on how the weekend running, and in St. Pete during the race, I was a little bit conservative on the overtake button, let's say, and he told me not to be so tight with it in a polite way, let's say, and just lots of little pointers over the course of kind of pre-season, back at the workshop as well as at the track, that just helped and meant that I can lean on somebody a bit more.
How about Spencer? You hit the ground running with him as a teammate, because chemistry is important in that regard.
Yeah, surprisingly, actually, we've not overlapped too much. I get on with him well. We went rock climbing last week, so from a personal level, there's no problem with that. But
right.
At a racetrack, it's surprising how little you cross over, and we're always in the car, and then you come out straight, talk to your engineers, and then back into the car, and then we never actually get much time until the end of the day, and then by that time you just want to get to bed. So
pit stop practice has wrapped up. We're just about ready to go green. Before we do, let's go to Dave first on pit road.
An opportunity to catch up with Steph Wilson. We've been talking to a lot of guys looking. I know it's the month of April, but there is that month comes after this. It's kind of looming out there. The month of May, the Indianapolis 500 comes up next month. Steph, you'll be around once again, making your second run at the Indy 500 after doing so with KV Racing back in 2016. Opportunity didn't pan out last year, but it was promised that you would have one here in 2018. I know as we start back up here, as this practice session continues here at ISM Raceway, I know you're really chomping at the bit to get back out there in May.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a lot of build-up to this year's Indy 500 for me. Getting announced back in October or November last year, I can't remember which month it was, but just a lot of build-up. A lot of excitement is building up to that, and just making sure I'm utilizing the time that I've got to prepare as much as possible. It's a good thing, but there's a lot of anticipation now. I wish that today we're jumping in the car right now, but good opportunity to be out here cheering on my Andretti Autosport teammates. Looks like they're having a good run with it, starting 4th and 8th tomorrow. And at the same time, trying to be a sponge, absorb as much as possible, because May's just around the corner.
It's going to be a 6-car team in the month of May. I guess you can look at it two ways. You're going to have a lot of help, but things are going to get strung out a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's we got a really great team. Myself, Zach, Carlos joining us, and then the veterans in Brian Hunter-Ray,
Alexander
Rossi, and Marco. Some just really great experience there to sort of kind of listen into and kind of get advice from it here and there. But hopefully, like I said, it's a double-edged sword, because a lot of experience to go off, but a lot of guys that are really talented have got the same car as you. So we just want to make the most of it and see what we got.
Looking back at last year, you had the ride, and then the Fernando Alonso opportunity came up. You stepped aside. The class that you showed in all of that was very impressive. Did you learn anything in all of that last year?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's kind of everything happens for a reason sometimes, and really, when you look back at it, it was also last minute anyway. That this has actually been a blessing, because now getting the deal done and as early as we did just gave us so much more time for me to prepare. As an Indy one-off, a lot of our time is spent in meetings or on phone calls, and last year I just didn't get enough time in the gym or thinking about the actual on-track product before May. It's kind of all about last-minute rush. So having the deal done so early this year, I can just focus on my on-track stuff and being as ready as I can to hit the track. So in two ways, the patience hopefully is going to pay off.
I know you've been spending a lot of time in the gym getting ready for it, because, yes, it is 500 miles. It could be a grueling race on race day.
Yeah, absolutely. Been doing a lot of boxing, a lot of cycling, running. It's been really good to just be able to know that I'm in the race, and just be able to focus on my fitness and focus on the other aspects of being a driver. So, really fortunate to have that opportunity, and like I said, just want to make the most of it. Really need to show that I belong this year.
Driven to Save Lives, that's the partnership with the team. You've also been picking up some other secondary sponsors as well.
Yeah, no, really fortunate to have Driven to Save Lives and the Indiana Donor Network working with us again. We're really excited to carry that campaign forward, encouraging people to become donors, become registered donors, and learn more about organ donation. And at the same time, really thankful to all the additional partners that we've been picking up recently. So, really thankful for everyone that's pulling behind me.
We love talking to you. We love seeing you at races. We're going to love it even more when we see you in a race car next month.
Can't wait. I hope to talk to you more then.
Countdown is on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks.
Steph Wilson. He'll be driving the number 25 Driven to Save Lives Honda for Andretti Autosport at the 102nd running of the Indianapolis 500. Mark.
Been in the broadcast booth with us, Davis, a driver analyst. Even worked pit road at Long Beach a couple of years ago, and thrilled to death for Steph Wilson for sure. Well, a green flag is out, and we think conditions right now very, very similar to what we're going to see when the green flag flies on the race tomorrow night. Let's get more specific about the conditions now by welcoming in Jay Query.
Mark, what is interesting is whenever we come here to the ISM Raceway in Phoenix, you have to remind yourself at nighttime that you're actually outdoors because there is virtually no humidity. It's at 16%, so the air is not thick at all. There is a very, very light breeze. That's the only reminder that you're not inside a room temperature, if you will, convention center. Maybe that's a little much because it is a tad bit warm right now. The ambient temperature is 81 degrees, but the track temperature is significantly cooler than where it was in the late afternoon and into the qualifying sessions. If you'll recall, the track got up into the high 120s, low 130s during the time that the sun was out on the track, but right now that has dipped down significantly. Now the average temperature throughout the course of the track is 91 degrees, but that's because of still some of that heat that has been absorbed in on the east end of the track. That's turns 3 and 4 because they had a later portion of the day when the sun was still saturating it. But nonetheless, track temperatures in the low 90s, ambient temperature in the low 80s, very low humidity, and just a very slight breeze. It could not be a better night here in Arizona.
Thank you, Jake. And we do want to clarify, we mentioned earlier that race control had issued a ruling to Ed Carpenter saying that his session was done. For clarification purposes, that was for the pit stop practice session only. So Ed is getting his full complement of time here in this practice session now that we're in the midst of the all skate, as it were. So Anders Krohn, you've watched now the last 5 or 6 minutes or so of green flag. How are these cars behaving in traffic?
It's still incredibly difficult, and if it's just a pack of 2 cars, it's very, very difficult to follow. But what happens is when a pack of cars catches a slower car, that's when things get really interesting, because that's when they have to start funneling out to find clean air, and that's where I think we're going to see in the race tomorrow. There's actually going to be a lot more action than what we saw in last year's race. So, one-on-one, we're not seeing a lot of movement right now, but I really think that when this field gets stacked up tomorrow, and especially when people are off strategy with tires, some that have 30 laps on their tires, some that have just a few laps on the tires, I think we're going to see really big differential in overall grip level, and that's where things are going to start happening. And now just paying attention to Sebastian Bourdais, I think, man, oh man, he's got a good race car there because he's able to follow so closely. So they have the mechanical balance of that car so good that when he gets in the wake of the car in front, he's not so much affected by the aero or the loss of aero rather. So he's pretty happy right now. But conversely, looking at the car here of Zach Veach, he's not looking happy at all. He's just been dropping back in the pack here, trying to keep up with it, but he just doesn't look like he has the confidence to really put the steering input in the middle of the corner when he's behind another car. And yeah, that's not a good place to be.
He said the team as a whole scratching their head a little bit through that practice session. The time's so very, very short. You could almost hear the frustration in his voice when we talked to him post-qualifying. So, as we mentioned, Jordan King is with us from Ed Carpenter Racing. And Jordan, we'll ask you, anything at all surprise you about this race car the first time you had a chance to drive it at speed? Did you have a preconceived notion about it and then you were surprised, or were you not? Was it what you expected?
The biggest thing for me coming into this season was actually to try and be as open as possible and not have blinkers on my view or anything. So that seemed to be working quite well so far, so I'd like to keep it like that. But after Sonoma being the first time in the car, there was a few things that maybe I wasn't so happy with, but then also quite a lot that I needed to just get used to. The team have been learning a lot. As you know, it's a new car for everybody, so there's a lot to learn for the engineers as well as me. So it was a double-edged sword. Both of us were learning rapidly. So I think our progression with the car and the progression with my driving with the car as well has just been so quick that kind of the car we had in Sonoma was very different behavioural-wise compared to the car we had in St. Pete. So it's constantly evolving, and I think the guys out here, this is the first time they're going to have proper oval running, following everybody. The aero kit's completely new, don't know how it's going to behave. And yeah, as you can see, everyone's trying their hardest to be close to people just to get an understanding of what the car does in traffic.
Clearly, we've had drivers come from Formula One and overseas and done very, very well, almost right out of the gate at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Takuma Sato, when he first came here, one of his favorite racetracks for some reason was Iowa Speedway, that short little bull ring. So some drivers come here from Formula One in Europe and adapt very quickly to the ovals. What is it about that some find to their liking, or is there an easy explanation for it?
I don't think there's an easy explanation for it, but my explanation to myself before I drove this car was it's still got 4 wheels, a steering wheel and an engine and a couple of pedals.
Great point.
I think good drivers can extract performance out of the car. It might take them a little bit longer, but the drivers that come over to America and do well, or the drivers that go over to Europe and do well, they're all good drivers. They've won races in whatever they were doing beforehand. So I don't think it's a case of bad drivers getting in the car and doing a bad job. It's a case of good drivers getting in the car and doing a good job. You know, they're still difficult cars to drive. If you took someone off the street and put them in them, they wouldn't be able to leave the pit lane. So.
Great explanation. 35 minutes remaining in this session. Charlie Kimball is P1, 179.797. Kanan Rossi, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Marco Andretti, the top 5 as preparations continue for tomorrow night's race from ISM Raceway.
Firestone presents Legendary Drives. The scariest thing in sports is a left turn, taking it over 220 miles an hour. Turn 1 at the Indy 500 demands everything a tire's got, putting 2.5 G's on them for 4 seconds. Once it's over, they only have to do it 199 more times. And if Firestone tires are so dependable they can handle turn 1, they'll handle any turn you need to make. Whatever you drive, drive a Firestone, the tire that drives IndyCar legends.
The road to the Indy 500 starts now.
Green.
The Honda Indy Grand Prix of Alabama, presented by America's First, returns to world-famous Barber Motorsports Park April 20th through 22nd. The fastest race car drivers in the world will do battle armed with 700 horsepower and 1,600 pounds of pure thunder. Fear is not an option. Failure is the enemy. Victory is the only thing that matters. Tickets are going fast. Get yours now at barberracingevents.com.
Laps are piling up here in this final practice session before we go racing tomorrow night. Just looking at that from a numbers perspective, Alexander Rossi's at 29. Marco Andretti's turned 30 laps, so some teams clearly taking full advantage of this final practice session, Andrew.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised at the short runs here done by a lot of teams. I would have thought the majority of people would have stayed out for longer runs to see exactly how the tires go off, because, again, it's a complete unknown here, and I think that the conditions at the test a few weeks ago was so non-representative of what we're going to see tomorrow that it's going to be crucial for these teams to pound in as many laps as possible to figure out exactly where is the drop-off of the tires. And I think that's going to be the really intriguing part about tomorrow, is who can have the freshest tires for the longer, because we know that the fuel window is way wider than that of the tires. And so I think right now, if I'm any of the teams up and down pit lane just sitting here at the moment, I'm going to want to get back out there and try and run in dirty air as much as I possibly can to learn about the car mechanically and aerodynamically, but also figure out exactly what's going to happen with the tires.
2-lap qualifying format on these ovals. Of course, knockout qualifying of the Firestone Fast 6 on the road and street courses. Jordan King with us for this final session from Ed Carpenter Racing. So we've talked about over the past few years, they've massaged the format a little bit, shortened up the sessions some to get more activity for the fans. And we talk about how it can be a real nail biter and how disappointing and frustrating it can be for drivers. I would assume it's a format you approve of. You were able to roll off fourth for the race. No worries, huh?
Yeah, there was a little bit of that in the debrief back in the truck afterwards. And we were talking about the session, and one of the guys said, it's hard. It won't be like that. Raining and the changeable conditions, and you'll struggle to make it out of a Q1. And then one of the engineers said, "Well, he's not thinking that. He went first time and went through to the fast six." But I'm under no illusion that it is going to be hard. And you saw some big names in St. Pete drop out in the first session, but then you also saw some other people have a surprise. I suppose you'd class myself as one of those having a surprise session. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty of that during the season.
Well, I think as Anders and I had talked about, let's face it, that whole weekend, we hope, is a precursor of what's to come in 2018.
Yeah, exactly. And it was crazy. Us up here in the booth, we were just talking about every single session. We had no idea who was going to be at the top, and then you have you going for a lap record, but you don't get the pole position, and all these crazy things happening. But I think it just kind of, to Mark's point, it's the pointer of what's going to be an incredible season, and just not knowing at any point in time who's going to be the strongest contender. And I really don't think we'll know until way past the month of May, really, who's going to be the dominant force, because we have so many different tracks leading up to that.
Yeah, I think there's the two aspects of that. The way the format is, if we've already discussed, you've got that one lap to get your time in, and if you make a mistake or what have you, you won't. But then also, everyone's still learning these cars, and it's all still quite new, so you make a mistake and that costs you so much. As you see, everyone's within half a second in qualifying, so it's so tight, and you don't have the car in the window. You never know where you're going to be.
Let's go back to pit road and Dave first.
A quick opportunity to catch up with Ricardo Unco. So, of course, is in the midst of his first full-time season in IndyCar. Renee Bender gave you a 22nd place finish at the streets of St. Petersburg, Florida. How's Kyle Kaiser doing, the reigning Indy Lights champion, if you will?
He's doing really good, to be honest. A surprise for us because he's been without driving for so long. We only did a check down here in the open test, and then one day at Sebring, and that's it. And that's everything he has. So very impressive today, to be honest. He's doing everything we asked him to do, and the team is actually doing a good job. So we're just gonna make laps here. It's a test weekend for us more than race. But yeah, this is our reality. So we're gonna try to take the most of that.
Here's the thing: as I was watching pit stop practice earlier, Kyle, these are his first ever pit stops in this series as well.
Yes, ever time, because we couldn't do it at Sebring. So this is actually the first ever time for him. And I think everything was really good, actually. Really surprised. I'm really happy with him.
What are you guys working on here in this remaining 30 minutes or so in this practice session?
We're obviously going to try to have a good race car, balance on traffic, so we didn't get the chance to drive on traffic on the open test as well. So now we're going to try to do that in the 30 minutes. And, like I said, the focus is to finish the race tomorrow. That's it.
Is he getting comfortable?
Yes.
Is he comfortable?
Yeah, it is.
Getting there.
Yeah, thank you.
Good luck tomorrow. Kyle Kaiser, he will roll off 14th. We go green tomorrow night. Further down pit road, Jake Query.
And when he does so, just before we get to Nick Yeoman with Sam Schmidt, one note, Kyle Kaiser will have a very interested spectator. He has a personal driving coach here at Phoenix, none other than Elio Castroneves, who is working with him this weekend. Castroneves working with him, talking to him, and observing his line from up high in a spotter's area. It was cleared by Tim Cindric and Roger Penske in terms of Penske Racing, who, of course, Castroneves is running with in sports cars and will run with in the Indianapolis 500. They said one thing to be sure, you're not to share any of the information from inside the Penske stable. That was well understood, and with the blessing of the team Penske, Elio Castroneves working with Kyle Kaiser. Nick Yeoman?
Well, it's been an impressive weekend so far for Schmidt-Peterson. Sam Schmidt, one of the co-owners of that team. Great start to the year at St. Petersburg. You guys showed a lot of speed, and then once again you come here to Phoenix, and your two drivers are going to make up row number 3. How impressive have you been, not just with Robert Wickens, but with James Hinchcliffe and this entire organization?
I have no idea what you said, but I'm...
How impressed have you been so far?
Well, we took a lot of heat, because there were some veterans walking around the paddock, and there were some Indy Lights graduates, but we really felt where we were at with our Aero program, with our Lucas Oil program, and the amount those companies are investing in our team, and the changes we made in the off season with personnel and everything else, that frankly we needed to be successful. And I watched what Robert did in 2011 in 3.5 Renault, which was not easy. Rossi finished 4th in that year, and he won the series with DeRossi and DeGrassi and a few others. So that was obviously impressive. Should have got a Formula One opportunity. Drove for Red Bull for a couple years, and then 6 years with Mercedes-Benz. And you're not German. That takes some talent too. So I knew the talent was there. He really wanted to go back to open wheel racing, which was what he grew up with, and it was the perfect storm. And his relationship with Hinch doesn't hurt. We had problems the last 2 years getting things done. With the teammates, for whatever reason, just wasn't working. A lot of this industry is about chemistry. I think things are off to a pretty good start.
You talked about the changes in the offseason. You've been running this team for quite a few years now. Was this the biggest season of change that you guys have ever had in the offseason?
Oh, yeah, by far. Our first year was 2011, and we got totally spoiled getting the pole at Indy and having some great runs that year. And then the new cars, the new bodywork came out, and that was tough for a small team with all those configurations and not a lot of budget to go try things out. But, I'm a loyal guy. I'm loyal to all my vendors, loyal to all my suppliers, and hated like hell getting rid of anybody at the end of any season. But, we just did not get the performance the last 2 years from a points perspective and a win perspective. And so we felt like we had to shake it up.
All right, that is Sam Schmidt. We'll let you get back on that pit box and continue to monitor his driver, Robert Wickens. He talked about it, Mark. It was a massive overhaul for that team as they were not running as well as they should have been towards the end of that 2017 season. A lot of personnel changes. I know it's early, but boy, it really seems like those changes have paid off as his two drivers, James Hinchcliffe, Robert Wickens, they're going to share, Team Canada is going to share row number 3 when we drop the green flag here in Phoenix tomorrow night.
Yeah, let's not forget a former series champion drove for Sam Schmidt. Simon Pagenaud had success with him, certainly. And I think, even though it's been just a year and a half, 2 years or so, boy, for the longest time before Dan Anderson and his group came along, Sam Schmidt, along with, for instance, Michael Andretti, really kept that Indy Lights program. At one time had, 4 or 5 cars at Indy Lights? I mean, he committed a lot of money and resources to that program.
He did, and I think a lot of people would argue that he almost killed the series because he was so dominant in it. And basically, it got to a point where if you weren't with Sam Schmidt, you weren't going to win the championship. And they just won so much in Indy Lights. And but really, to your point about Simon Pagenaud, he's really the one that put their IndyCar program on the map by running so well, getting a couple of race wins, and obviously being so strong in the championship back in 2013. So, that group has definitely regrouped over the offseason, that's for sure. And, it does look like it's paid off. But speaking of changes, I've been watching pit lane, and never before in my life have I seen so many people with the rear engine cowling off. And what that essentially means is we're not happy with the car. You see the mechanics on the back of the car changing springs, changing dampers, and that means we're throwing everything we can at it to make this car handle the traffic as well as possible. And at one point here, I think I saw 5 or 6 cars down the pit lane all making the same rear change to the rear of the car. So clearly a lot of teams trying to figure this out, and I think that's probably part of the reason why they haven't done so many laps, is that they're just desperately trying to find some compliance here to be able to run in traffic.
More on that from Jay Query.
Well, the thing is, Anders, I wanted you to kind of expand on this, because this is the thing that I've noticed. This is interesting because everyone here, of course, came out and had the opportunity to do the test for 2 days, and that included under the lights in very similar conditions. But when you look at this particular weekend and any new information, this is a completely different situation than we've seen earlier today, and the fact that obviously the track is cooler, but more so, and just as I say it here in turn number 1, there's a slight breeze that kicks up, but it was fairly breezy in particular during qualifying, and that has subsided a little bit. So I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anders, but a lot of what you were able to tabulate and play with in terms of the afternoon practice session and then qualifying probably goes out the window in terms of these particular conditions. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, absolutely. The only condition that's really going to count towards the race is this one, and that's why this session has such a premium. And just saw on the screen here, Kyle Kaiser almost ramming into the back of Ryan Hunter-Reay as he was either trying to generate some space here or something. But yeah, Kyle Kaiser lucky to escape there, and yeah, Kyle Kaiser really in the battle of it here with Alexander Rossi as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This session is so important, and the test that they did here a few weeks ago, as much colder as it was, yeah, you can barely learn anything. So I wouldn't call it a wash. You're still going to learn some things about the overall downforce levels and gearing and so on forth. But as far as final setup information, yeah, you're not going to learn that till this evening.
Happy to have Jordan King from Ed Carpenter Racing with us in the booth for this final warm-up session. And Jordan, let's speak to the ability to communicate with that engineer and the guys in charge of the setup of that race car. When you go out for a session, there's something not to your liking. I trust with the success that you had in St. Petersburg that line of communication was established pretty solidly and firmly right out of the gate.
Yeah, I still think there's room for improvement from that side, but I definitely think that aspect of the driving is probably the most important, other than driving on the circuit, as you're two different human beings trying to communicate what you feel through your bum, through your hands, through your feet in the car, to someone who's sitting behind a laptop looking at the numbers and the lines. There's quite a lot going on there that you need to actually be able to relay to them in a way that they will understand it, but also they are giving you information in a way that you need to be able to relate that to change of driving style. So I for one definitely believe that engineer to driver relationship is really important, just to understand the way they work, the way I work, and how you can work together.
Is that where another area where it might be valuable to have an owner who's a driver like Ed Carpenter to mediate a situation like that, maybe when those two sides can't, get on the same page?
I would say so, yes. I've not experienced it because most of the time they unplug the radio, I drive down the pit lane, and they can say what they like about me once I've left. But Ed knows the guys in his team very, very well. So I'm sure once I have relayed information, if they don't quite get it, they can then talk about it and understand it a bit better. But even just me sitting on the pit wall now, like, I can see the relationship between Ed and them when he's in the car, and vice versa. And there's quite a lot of similarities between the way I would describe something, but then if I describe something and the engineers are looking at the data on the screen, they can see what I'm referring to from a numbers point of view as well, which is helpful with the live data. It's instant access to it. They can see that, and they can come in after a session and they can say, oh, that was worse, wasn't it? And because they've already seen the numbers. And there's certain cues that I feel in the car that tells me, that's understeer or that's oversteer or whatever, and they're now working out what that means on the data from my side of point of view.
How much were you changing in terms of the car, in terms of the changes that you can make with the steering wheel, the setup inside the race car? How busy were you in that regard during a particular session?
Not too bad, actually. I think the way I describe it is you've got to have a lot of trust in the engineers. I don't go into a meeting and try and rewrite the manual on how to do things. I tell them what I feel, tell them what I think, but being very honest with it. Just say, look, this is what I think, this is ABC, and then they'll come back with CBA, and give me the answer. So it's not a case of I want to change this because of this. It's very much I just go, well, this is purely how I feel the car is round this corner, and then they will have a think about it and come back with an answer.
Do you think owners and engineers ever unplug the radio to talk about you when you weren't listening?
110% they do. Absolutely.
Obviously, it's only ever nice things. It's always roses and everything. Yeah.
110% they do, and it's actually quite funny watching up and down the pit stand during races. If someone's had a bad run or something, and you can just see in the body language, and you can see the mouths going, and you can only imagine, and you would certainly want to be a fly on the wall there. But Actually, Jordan, I just got a request on Twitter here asking if you would ever consider running Indy Lights on a few of your off weekends at any of the ovals to potentially learn them ahead of a potential full-time campaign in 2019.
I hadn't actually even thought about that at all, to be honest. I suppose the short answer, no, as Indy Lights requires some more backing, or it requires something else, where I'm in a great position with ECR where they want me to be there. I'm learning a lot sitting here anyway, going through the briefings with the engineers and being on the pit wall. So yeah, it probably would be great if an opportunity came up, but I don't think it's something I would actively try and sort out.
Well, for all the team owners out there listening right now,
if there's an empty seat, maybe.
Exactly. So come to Freedom 100, we could have Jordan King in.
Yeah, you want to go back, you want to YouTube a few finishes, Jordan, to see how.
I've seen a couple on Facebook.
Oh my goodness!
Do not Google my name and crash.
179. 797. That's top speed, I should say, for Charlie Kimball. Kanad, Rossi, Newgarden, and Hunter Ray, the top fives. Let's get an update from pit road today first.
Yeah, we just saw Scott Dixon head back out to the race course. Not a happy driver right now. In fact, they had that front cowling off for a good, I call it almost 10 minutes or so. They were throwing different springs, dampers, anything they can do to make that race car a little bit quicker right now. Basically 10th quick, but consider what happened in qualifying. Scott Dixon is going to roll off 17th. When's the last time you saw the four-time champ roll off 17th? He's going to have his work cut out for him tomorrow. This team's not happy right now, so we'll see what happens. But again, they made some big-time changes to that number 9 PNC Bank Honda for Chip Ganassi Racing. We'll see if it improves here in the last 10 minutes of this practice session.
Jake Query.
And another thing that's interesting as Dave's talking about that, look at the teammate Ed Jones and as well Simon Pagino. They got very close together, perhaps too close for comfort here in the last few laps. But you talked about, Mark Janes, the fact that Charlie Kimball, just shy of 180 at 179.797, is the fastest in this session. He is the fastest, in fact, the only to go over 179 miles an hour as you take a look at Simon Pagino. But what Kimball has been doing, and what we're starting to just now see drivers do, is testing out and staying in that outside line, that secondary groove to the outside of the racetrack. Simon Pagino was able to put his car wherever he wanted it a year ago to lead 116 laps en route to winning this event. And such a big part of that, Mark, as you know, for so many years in calling the turns, Sam Hornish Jr. comes to mind. Drivers that are comfortable, especially on this smaller tracks, going with that secondary groove. And what we're seeing now in the latter part of this session is an awful lot of cars that are starting to rubber down and get comfortable with that outside line all the way around.
I just watched Simon Pagino complete a lap. In fact, he's coming off of turn number 4. And Jordan, I'm under the distinct impression that when he parks it off pit road, he's probably going to tell him not to touch much.
Yeah, I completely agree. Watching him, I think this car he's about to overtake, whoever that is about the 6th car in quick succession he's gone past. So he's definitely feeling good in traffic. So that'll be someone to watch tomorrow.
But I think the really nice job he does is that he goes in, sort of backs up the corner a little bit, doesn't attack that much on entry, and has a slightly higher line on entry, and then he crosses over the aero wash of the car ahead of him, especially going into turn 3, so it enables him to not lose so much aero. So you'll notice coming off the corners, he actually stays a bit lower than the car ahead of him, giving him clean air for the majority of the corners. So I think the way he's working with that air right now is the reason why he's doing so well.
IndyCar and ISM Raceway been working since late Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, trying to get that high side of the racetrack rubbered in a little bit. I haven't seen much to indicate it's two groove at this point. Have you?
No, I haven't really, but I don't think we're going to really learn everything until tomorrow in the race, because right now everyone's on similar mileage tires, so no one really has a big discrepancy in their tire mileage. As we see a big slow up here for Ed Carpenter. He looks like he had a bit of a wiggle there in turn 1, but I think tomorrow is when we're really going to see the big differences, because you can have someone that could be on 50-lap tires and then someone coming straight out of the pits, and that's when you're going to be forced to go to the high side, because you're going to be so much faster than someone that on mileage out tires. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot of change from today till tomorrow.
Jordan, not just in the Verizon IndyCar Series car, but regardless of the form that you've run, you're on that ragged edge and it's loose. Do you feel it all? Are you able to quickly gather it back in, or sometimes is it just gone before you realize it's gone?
No, I've touched wood. I've not had the joys of going too loose on an oval and ending up in some concrete wall at high speed. But that's the feeling you're trying to get with the engineers, to actually have a really soft touch with the car, to know where the edge is. And that was something in St. Pete that we worked on really hard, because at first, it's very on edge, the car's moving about a lot, and when you're on a street circuit and the walls are right there, you don't want it to be like that. So we worked throughout the 3 practices just to get the car more compliant, more feeling in the car. And it worked, clearly, but that was the main thing that you focus on, is actually just being able to have a good enough feeling in the car that you're happy to slide it. The car's still going to be moving as much as it was when it wasn't handling as well, but you can just drive it quicker. It's the simplest way of describing it.
So when you tackled St. Pete in the practice sessions, we've talked about it for years since we've been going there, off of that hairpin down the straightaway, that's where everybody wants to try to gain as much speed as they possibly can. Is your approach to tackle that, try to be as fast there as you can be, or do you work on the course as a whole with the car?
Well, actually, funny enough, in my quick lapping qualifying where we broke the lap record, I was actually a 10th and a half slower through the hairpin to start the lap, purely from the fact that the tyres weren't quite in, the clouds had come over, the temperature dropped. So I went through there, I was still pushing, the car was still moving, but on my dash I was a 10th down. But then the rest of the lap was really good. So yes, I think if you focus one corner, it's going to be good, but you need a car to perform throughout the whole lap, and I think that demonstrated that we had a good car through the whole circuit.
Yeah, for sure. Did you ever get into a situation where you felt like you had to compromise on the lap, where you had to give up, let's say, 8-9, which is obviously, very, very different to a corner like turn 1 or turn 4 or any of the other corners? Did you ever feel like you had to make more compromise than you ever did in GP2 or anything else that you've done overseas?
Yes and no. In some ways, yes. In other ways, no. There's always. We've had an accident. We'll come back to that because someone's just gone high at turn 4.
Now Spencer Pigot awfully slow up against the outside retaining wall going down the front straightaway in that 21 car. So we think that might have been the source of the contact, and we'll wait to take a look at the replay as that car starts to slow to a stop. Let's go down to pit road. We'll give Anders a chance to look at the replay, come back, and reset what happened with Spencer Pigot. We're under caution. Jay Query.
A.B. Hamilton, an interesting observer as Charlie Kimball brings in that Tresiba car number 23 for Carlin Racing. And Davey, let me ask you, you guys obviously found some pretty good speed. Tell me about what you were able to change in terms of kind of chasing this track, and was that an assisted, if you will, a toad lap?
Actually, it wasn't assisted. That's the good news. The bad news is we kind of missed it early on. And so we regrouped and went back to a qualifying type run, and we had to just see if it would work. And so we were heavy fuel and used tires and ran a good lap. But now we got to get in race mode, so we're working on that right now.
Lastly, let me ask you, how many different tracks do we see here over the course of today, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
In other words, you get what I'm saying there? You're constantly chasing it, right?
One thing about I lived it here, man. I know what heat does at this place. And so such quick sessions between, we only really have an hour, then you qualify, and then this. And I'd say early on, it caught us off guard. The track, was 130 degrees almost with, 95-degree ambient temp. And the cars, I think everybody, we've seen the times way down, and we just couldn't get any grip. And so in qualifying, we actually had a better car than he qualified, but he didn't know what he had. He had to go out there and just kind of risk it. And now we're back. I think we're gaining ground now.
You look very astute and professional here. I'm glad we didn't rub off on you.
Yeah, good thing, right?
All right, Davey Hamilton, we'll let you get back to work. Charlie Kimball, of course, has brought in that car, that Tresiba machine. And again, Carlin Racing, What have we talked about, Mark? And, I was just talking to the team here. They were saying, look, this is a team that is so accustomed to winning in so many different series, but yet at the same time, just getting their feet wet in terms of the Verizon IndyCar Series. And I think you've got to give a lot of credit to Carlin coming over to North America, starting out at lights, getting familiar with the tracks, getting familiar with the cars, working their way up. It's not just, of course, the Mazda Road to Indy for drivers, but for teams as well. And good to see that Charlie Kimball car, as Davey had talked about, that they found something in this session, now just a matter of carrying it into the race.
Good to hear from our longtime driver analyst, Davey Hamilton, now with Carlin Racing, calling the shots for Charlie Kimball. Okay, Anders, they've got the car refired. He's going to drive it back around the pit road, talking about Spencer Pigot. Brought out the caution here late in the session. You've had a chance to see the replay.
Yeah, and that's about as lucky as you're ever going to get here at ISM Raceway. He was just tucked up behind Scott Dixon, just got a little bit of aero push. That pushed him up into the gray area, and the moment you're up in the marbles here and you're up in the dusty bits, you're just hanging on for dear life. And he actually did a heck of a job just kind of slowly understeering up towards the wall and just grazed it. So I doubt there'll be a lot of damage to that car, which is good, but obviously not the confidence boost he was looking for.
Those of you on the East Coast, good news. You'll be rewarded for staying up late with us. IndyCar announcing that the session will be extended by 10 minutes. We are under caution as we speak. A single car incident involving Spencer Pigot. Contact with the outside retaining wall as preparations continue for tomorrow night's race here at ISM Raceway.
Firestone presents Legendary Drives. It was the 1969 Indy.
From the visit to the outside retaining wall by the 21 of Spencer Pigot, we saw the crew working on that car, taking a look-see at it. And again, Anders, to recap, it looked like the damage very, very minimal, which you don't say that very often when you make contact with the wall here at ISM Raceway.
Not at all, and especially not the momentum that he carried up into the gray there in turn 3 and 4. That could have been a lot worse. And it's so easy when you get up there, when you're understeering up towards the wall and you're putting in the steering input, it's so easy to just let go of the throttle. But what happens on an oval with that is that the rear tends to swap ends on you and just slams you into the wall. So it was actually good work there for Spencer. He probably did a little bit of overlapping of the pedals, just grazing in the brake pedal to make sure he didn't transfer the weight too quickly and spin up to the wall there. So actually not what he wanted, but that was actually a pretty nice save there at the end of the day.
Well, we said the session was extended by 10 minutes, but it doesn't look like that's the case for Spencer Pigot, Anders. We see him climbing out of the race car.
Yeah, no, it was a big enough hit to where some wishbones or maybe an upright or something will be a little askew. So, yeah, they wouldn't want to risk it to go back out there. So, yeah, day done for him, but obviously new chances tomorrow.
It's interesting to note the amount of force those suspension pieces are under, especially at speed, road and street courses, ovals, no matter the case. But times like that, they seem so very, very frail, when in fact they're not. They're very, very strong.
Well, they do, but then you go to St. Petersburg, and I remember how hard Scott Dixon and Takuma Sato hit into turn 1, and it was like a huge hit, and somehow they both just carried on. And I always find that very interesting. And on the street courses, I'm sure, Jordan, you can speak to this. I mean, the fact that you're actually able to, on a quality lap, hit the wall pretty hard and still be able to go.
The thing I've noticed with these cars is they are actually very strong compared to other cars I've driven where you touch somebody or touch a wall and it just all collapses, where these actually take a bit of a hit. You know, they are a bit of a fighter. During St. Pete, I went side by side with Rossi and kind of ran him a bit wide, and we touched a bit. And on the side of the car, there was like someone had just taken a little bit of sandpaper and scratched the side. That was about it.
Charlie Kimball is P1. Then Tony Kanaan, Rossi, Newgarden, Hunter Ray, the top 5. Andretti, Sato, Pagano, Piggott, and Dixon, the top 10. Hinchcliffe, Laced, Power, Chilton, Wickens through positions 15. Before we give you the rest of the full field rundown, let's hear from Spencer Piggott again. Dave first, and early into his evening, he was 9th quick when that incident occurred.
Yeah, 9th quick. I know you were looking forward to get a full session, and that's obviously not going to happen. What did happen out there?
Just trying to run in traffic and stuff. Someone came out of the pits and was, I think, trying to slot in, and we basically just arrived at the apex of turn 3 at the same time, and I was just up in the gray and up in the marbles and then along for the ride at that point. So, luckily there's no real major damage, just a little, very small piece of suspension is bent, so we'll get it fixed and it'll be the same tomorrow.
Are you good to go tomorrow, you think?
Sorry?
Are you good to go tomorrow?
In terms of the car, yeah, it'll be fine. Like I said, super.
In terms of what you were working on, though.
But yeah, in terms of the balance, we still have some work to do. I think, we're struggling a little bit with the balance, running in traffic and behind other cars. So we'll try to get a little bit better at that. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, we have what we have at this point, so it's race time now.
There's a lot of talk about trying to rubber up a second groove out there. Did you notice that at all?
Well, I was in that second groove until I wasn't, so it didn't seem great. That's kind of why I, went around the outside there. I thought there'd be a bit more grip, but it was still very dirty, at least in 3 and 4. So hopefully it comes in a bit more, but so far it seems still pretty narrow.
We'll see what happens tomorrow. Good luck to you. Glad you're okay.
Thanks.
That's Spencer Piggott, Mark Janes.
Yeah, and I just don't know if it's realistic to expect that we're going to be running side by side like you typically would at a Texas Motor Speedway or whatnot. But I think what we can see here, and that I've been paying attention to for the next few laps, that Sebastian Bourdais has actually been doing a really good job with, is just slightly manipulating the line on the way into the corner, backing up the corner, not pushing too hard, and getting a really good drive. And I think what's going to end up happening is you may not be able to overtake the car directly ahead of you if the driver ahead of you isn't in traffic, but the moment when the driver ahead of you hits traffic, that's when you can pounce. So I think it's going to be a very, very tricky waiting game tomorrow in the race, and it's going to be interesting to see how all this unfolds. But Sebastian Bourdais, just paying attention to his car placement at the moment, I think he's in a pretty good position.
Well, Anders, I don't think that this racetrack has necessarily ever been conducive in IndyCar style racing to actual side-by-side racing, as you said. I think that the thing that people do want to see, though, is the overtaking. Sure.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
the question.
And we'll definitely see more overtaking than we did last year, no questions asked. But I think it's just a bit more of a game of chess than any of the track here. It just takes positioning yourself appropriately so that when the driver ahead of you hits traffic or comes up to someone that's a little bit slower, that then you can pounce. And so it's just going to take a few laps to really work on someone here to be able to complete those passes. But it'll absolutely happen. But I think it's the smartest driver and the smartest team that's going to win the race tomorrow, not the one with the most gusto, if you will.
I've never asked a driver to name names, Jordan King. Not going to ask you to do it here tonight, but did you put anything away in the memory bank when you talk about overtaking at St. Pete? Guys that you know that you can work with a little bit, and guys that you know you got to be a little more careful around moving forward?
A very small amount, yes. That, for me, is actually probably the biggest learning curve. As back in Europe, coming up the junior formula, you race against the same people all the time. Half the people in Formula One I've raced against, so I know them from karting, how they race. You know who you can give an inch or who you can't, and all those little things. Where over here, it's 90% of the grid I haven't raced against before, so it's learning that. And I've got a reasonable idea in St. Pete, but I think the best attitude you can have is just treat everybody as if they're the worst person, and then you're not going to go wrong, and then gradually learn from there.
Specifically, who was the worst? We're going to put you
can put him in that position. Yes. I'm not going to. I've had a few drivers tell me off the air.
I can give you the politician answer and dodge the question and never come with an answer.
Fair enough. We'll get you another time. Yeah.
7 minutes remaining in this session. Kimball, Dixon, Kanaan, Rossi, Chavez, the top 5. Newgarden, Hunter Ray, Andretti, Ray Hall, and Sato, the top 10. Then Carpenter, Pagano, Piggott, Hinchcliffe, laced through position 15, 16 Power, 17 Chilton, 18th Wickens, 19th Veach, 20th Jones, 21st Bourdais, 22nd Kaiser, 23rd Fittipaldi. Go back to Scott Dixon's comments after qualifying, Anders. I remember a couple of years ago when he went from last to first at Mid-Ohio, he sounded confident after qualifying was over. I mean, he was relatively assured of the fact that he was going to have a good race car. I didn't hear that confidence after that qualifying session a little bit earlier today.
Not at all. And I'm looking at his teammate Ed Jones right now, and he just struggles to keep the car underneath him, even in clean air. He's got no one around, or he had no one around him, and even at that, he was struggling to keep the car underneath him. So, yeah, they're not a happy camp right now, and I think they're really going to have to throw the kitchen sink at it overnight and hope that something works out, because right now, that car is just looking vicious to drive.
GP2, whatever the case may be, Jordan King, how frustrating is it for the team and the driver when you know there's something not right with the race car, but you just can't find it?
I think that's the worst place to be in. You go over and over everything from in your mind as a driver through to the data with the engineers, and when you just can't get it right, it's just the worst thing. And you change everything and you turn the car upside down. And the thing on a race weekend, it's so short and so little time, you can only change so much. And actually, in situations like that, you just have to go back to the drawing board, take the car apart and go, right, start again, different concept. Because clearly the concept we had didn't work.
I've also seen situations, Anders, where, especially on oval qualifying, in the last practice session before you go qualifying, you have someone who's really, really close to having maybe a top 5 or a top 6. So they try to get a little creative and outthink themselves in the debrief and go too far the other way.
Yeah, and that happens so many times, and especially the Indy 500 when you have more track time than you need, really, and so you can outthink yourself and outsmart yourself so often. But I don't really think that's the case here. I think in qualifying, what we saw is some people being maybe a little too aggressive, and but the majority of people maybe being a little too conservative in qualifying just because they didn't want to put the car at risk. But yeah, it's not an easy position to be in, and I think tomorrow is going to be one of those typical Scott Dixon championship type drives where if he knows he doesn't have the car, he'll still somehow manage to get a top 5 or a top 10 out of it, and that's what makes him such a great driver, is even when he isn't supposed to get there, he does somehow, some way.
Jordan, Anders mentioned IMS, over the next month or so. Of course, Barber Motorsports Park in St. Pete, they don't have the history of a Long Beach or an IMS. Still beautiful facilities, very picturesque, and mainstays certainly on the schedule. But your thoughts and impressions, the anticipation you have as iconic as Long Beach and IMS is, even though you're going to be on the road course there, not on the oval, but you have to be awfully excited to get to both of those venues.
I wouldn't say I'm actually any more excited than going to any of the other circuits.
Good.
For me, I just want to race cars.
Sure.
It's that simple. I want to go to the circuits, I want to race them as fast as I can, and I want to get a result. And I had the same thing when I went to places like Monaco back in Europe in GP2, and I remember walking around Monaco doing the track walk and then driving the car there, and yeah, it was kind of like, oh, I'm on this iconic circuit, but once you got the helmet on,
you go to work.
It's still a bit of tarmac in between some barriers. So yes, there is the iconic aspect of it. When I drove over the Isle of Bricks a couple of weeks ago, I did kind of say to myself, that's quite cool. I've done that for the first time. But other than that,
yeah, Davey Hamilton
it's
would,
a circuit.
Yeah, Davey Hamilton would say that, Anders, about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He said, if you go through, guys are gathered up in the green room and you do the walkout, the crowd, the pomp and circumstance, and back home again in Indiana, he said, but man, when you climb in that cockpit, strap that helmet on, it's just time to go racing, and it doesn't really matter where you are.
No, exactly, and obviously it's a little bit different maybe for the one-off drivers when that is the only event that you do, and I think that certainly changes things a little bit. But no, I completely agree, and you have to have that mindset of it is just another race, even though one race is bigger than the other, and you have to have the same mindset going into every single race, trying to maximize it. And trouble here for James Hinchcliffe, who's very, very slow. Don't know. I saw him up in the gray. I don't know if he had contact with the wall or not, but he's very, very slow going down the back straight. So Yeah, clearly some struggle for him in traffic as he was running in sort of the middle of that big pack of cars running about. So we'll pay attention to the right side of his car to see what happened here. Matthias Leist looks like he had a run pop down the inside, and Hinch tried to run around the outside. And did you see what I just saw with Matthias Leist with the right rear brakes glowing? I wonder if Matthias Leist is dragging the brakes like crazy in here, seeing if there's any way that he can pin the car and get some more grip, more mechanical grip for it in traffic. So yeah, we'll pay attention to that. But yeah, Matthias Leist with his right rear brake rotor just glowing going into turn one.
Pitchers in baseball, Jordan King, they get a rotation. They start every fourth day. People talk about basketball players getting into a rhythm when it comes to shooting, and so much of sports you talk about rhythm. Talk about the difficulties is there any difficulty, or do you anticipate any, not being full-time and in the car, out of the car?
No, I don't see that being a problem. Yeah, as we previously spoke about earlier, yes, I'm a rookie, but I've been driving for 12 years. So I think there's been a lot of learning and getting to this stage in my career where actually you put the helmet on and you get into that zone, in inverted commas. You know, you really do just want to, as soon as whatever the cue is in your mind, or however each driver does it, but being able to get into that zone as quickly and as effectively as possible, I think is the biggest aspect, and that's something you can really see in qualifying, when you need to get that 101% out of everything for that one lap. You know, if you aren't quite in that place, I think for a race situation, it's a longer race, there's more going on. You don't quite need to be in that closed environment. You need to have an extra bit of thinking capacity. But for that qualifying lap, you know, you can get out of the car and go, actually, I don't remember anything about it, but you were on pole.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is an aspect of being able to just, you know, literally switch on. But then when you get out of the car, being able to switch off, because if you spend so long of the day in that heightened state,
sure,
you'll be knackered by 9 a.m.
Checkered flag is out. Anders on the session. Looks like the top 16 cars separated by less than a half a second.
Yeah, and I don't really think we can pay too close attention to the lap times here, because everyone's just mainly focused on exactly how the cars are running. I mean, Dixon's up in P2, and we know he's not a happy camper right now. So don't think we should pay too close attention to the lap times, but certainly just going up and down pit lane and seeing how many changes have been made during the course of this session. Yeah, clear that a lot of these teams and drivers are struggling with the handling of the cars, and Scott Dixon's certainly one of them.
Let's get an update on James Hinchcliffe. Dave, first on pit road.
Yeah, just before we go off here, I know a lot of people are James Hinchcliffe fans. No issues whatsoever with the car. It was Matthias Leist who came down in front of him, had to wash up a little bit, backed off, and he was had to slow up just to avoid any issue or whatever. But anyway, long story short, James Hinchcliffe's okay, good to go. He is ready to go. We go back to racing tomorrow.
Again, Sebastian Bourdais and Simon Pagenaud will be your front row tomorrow. Row number 3 features Will Power and Alexander Rossi. Row 3, James Hinchcliffe and Robert Wickens. Row 4, Joseph Newgarden, Ryan Hunter-Reay. And row 5, Tony Kanaan and Pietro Fittipaldi. Ed Jones and Graham Rahal make up row number 6. Row 7.
Yeah, right now we don't have a clear-cut answer to that whatsoever, which is again, like St. Pete, we had no clue, and it's brilliant.
6 p.m. local, 9 p.m. Eastern, the Desert Diamond West Valley Casino Phoenix Grand Prix. We hope you will join us for all of the action. The director of the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network is Wally Levitt. On-site engineering and production by Rick Evans. Good stuff from Dave First, Jake Query, Nick Yeoman on pit road. Thanks again to Jordan King of Ed Carpenter Racing for being our guest in the booth for this final warm-up session. For Anders Scrone, this is Mark J.